Chapter 518. In the end, the martial arts that Xianxia learned was actually just a gold core stage cultivation method. In the future, as Qin Shueqing's cultivation continued to improve, this cultivation method might gradually become stronger and perfect. But before that, if Xianxia wanted to completely defeat Xianyuan Wuhan with this imperfect martial arts cultivation method, this was tantamount to a fool's dream. Xianyuan Wuhan was really too strong. The so-called invincible in the same realm was not just a saying. Xianyuan Wuhan did not even use any magic arts, nor did he use any magic treasures. He only needed to copy and learn Xianghua's moves through actual combat, and he could quickly master these moves, and then use the same moves to deal with Xianxia. The reason was not that Xianyuan Wuhan had a unique skill of giving someone a taste of their own medicine, but because the moves that Xianxia used were all on the surface, so Xianyuan Wuhan could quickly learn them for his own use. Immortal techniques were from the inside out, martial arts were from the outside in. The two seemed to be poles apart, but in fact, they were different paths leading to the same goal. It was just like that old saying, the great Tao was like mercury flowing to the ground, and every grain was round. On the stage, Xianxia and Xianyuan Wuhan exchanged blows quickly. Below the stage, everyone cheered for Xianxia in unison. Since Xianyuan Wuhan was the great demon king in everyone's hearts, then Xianxia, who dared to fight with the great demon king, naturally became the hero in everyone's hearts. Although everyone knew that Xianxia would definitely fail, as long as he did not fall, the cheers below the stage would not stop for a moment. The two figures were like ghosts as they moved quickly on the stage. In just 10 minutes, the two had already exchanged no less than 200 moves. And as the two fought longer and longer, Xianxia also gradually showed signs of defeat. Just like a sports competition, when the skills and experience of the two sides were almost the same, physical strength became the most important deciding factor. Maintaining the protective shield consumed true essence, and every attack also consumed true essence. Xianxia was merely in the middle stage of the Gold Core realm. How could he fight with Xianyuan Wuhan, who was in the peak stage of the Gold Core realm for a long time? At that moment, any onlooker with a little bit of knowledge could see that Xianghua's defeat was inevitable. This child, he's already been forced to this point, but he's still not willing to show his true abilities. Yuan Liang, do you think he really only knows these moves, or does he have other plans in mind? The patriarch and the 8 elders were still watching the battle from the sky. After hearing the patriarch's question, Genrio fell silent. He did not respond. That was because he knew, regarding Xianghua's current performance, the patriarch was indeed somewhat disappointed. To be honest, if Xianxia wasn't a sovereign disciple, he wouldn't even have the qualifications to exchange blows with Xianyuan Wuhan. No matter how the outside world slandered and insulted Xianyuan Wuhan, in the patriarch's eyes, Xianyuan Wuhan would always be the person who had the most hope of breaking through to become a heavenly venerable after him. Outsiders didn't know the trick and only thought that Xianyuan Wuhan's potential had been squeezed dry. In reality, it was Xianyuan Wuhan himself who was unwilling to break through to become a Yuaning. In order to be able to repeatedly enter the great illusionary land, Xianyuan Wuhan had suppressed himself for 200 years. Even the patriarch couldn't help but be amazed by such boldness. There aren't that many geniuses in the world to begin with, and all those who have appeared out of nowhere are those who have accumulated in the past. Compared to Xianyuan Wuhan, Xianxia instantly became ordinary. As expected, after another 100 to 200 moves, Xianxia accidentally revealed an extremely small flaw because of his lack of strength. Xianyuan Wuhan keenly found this flaw, so he grabbed the opportunity and directly hit Xianghua's chest with a crushing punch. Bam! Accompanied by a muffled sound, a strong gust of wind blew on the stage. Xianghua's body was like a sandbag, and he was directly sent flying 20 meters away by Xianyuan Wuhan's attack. After Xianyuan Wuhan punched again, he didn't continue to attack. Instead, he suddenly stopped and silently waited for Xianxia to stand up from the ground again. Unlike the people below the stage who were sighing and lamenting, Xianxia appeared very relaxed. After Xianxia stood up from the ground, he politely cupped his fists and bowed to Xianyuan Wuhan. Then he said calmly, "Sir, you're very capable. I admit defeat." Although this punch didn't cause any substantial damage to Xianxia, he still admitted defeat very straightforwardly. After all, Xianyuan Wuhan didn't use any Dharma treasures or spells. He could actually easily defeat Chonghua with just a half-baked martial arts move that he learned on the spot. Even if he continued to fight, wouldn't he be humiliating himself? Anyway, Chonghua wasn't interested in the great illusionary land. Since he lost, then he would just admit defeat straightforwardly. Perhaps because he was used to being trampled by Qin Xueqing, Chonghua didn't care about winning or losing at all. After admitting defeat, he turned around and prepared to leave. However, just as Chonghua admitted defeat and left, Xianyuan Wuhan's voice suddenly sounded behind him. I heard that Mr. Chen once fought against the 4 immortals of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven by himself, so I originally thought that this master of the heavenly pivot must have some great ability to maneuver unhindered and invincible. Who would have thought that after seeing him today, I would know that the rumors were also untrue? At this point, Xianyuan Wuhan suddenly couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. Supreme Being? That's all. Xianyuan Wuhan's voice was very soft, but his tone was full of mockery. It was obvious that he was implying something with these words. So, Chonghua immediately stopped in his tracks. He slowly turned around, and the expression on his face finally became serious. I know, you said this just to provoke me to fight you with all my strength. But I still want to remind you, you can scold me, but you shouldn't have brought Mr. Chen into this. As he spoke, Chonghua stretched out his right hand. Then, without any movement from Chonghua, a long sword with a cold blue light appeared in his hand out of thin air. Come on. Don't you all want to know what I learned from Mr. Chen? Then I'll show you today, what exactly did I learn? He didn't know when it started, but the figure who smiled all day to make his daughter happy had become an absolutely inviolable existence in Chonghua's mind. Xianyuan Wuhan could say that he wasn't good at learning, but he definitely couldn't say that Mr. Chen's reputation was undeserved. Including Genrio, the patriarch, the 8 elders, and Xianyuan Wuhan, who was in front of him at this moment, almost everyone was eager to know what peerless cultivation method Chonghua had learned from Chen Shi. Was the cultivation method used by a supreme being really that important? Thinking of this, Chonghua couldn't help but lower his head slightly to look at the long sword in his hand. In a trance, he saw the scene of Chen Shi holding the little fellow and standing in the courtyard with a smile on his face. Yes, Chonghua was very lucky. Others would lose their lives in vain if they went to the Tianshu ruins. Not only was he fine when he went to the Tianshu ruins, but he was also lucky enough to live with Supreme Chen for a period of time. But who would have thought that, during this period of time, what really benefited Chonghua was Mr. Chen's way of dealing with people. Chen Shi indeed didn't accept Chonghua as his disciple, and he had never even planned to do so. But in Chonghua's heart, Chen Shi was still half his master. It was just that he didn't dare to say it out loud. So, Xianyuan Wuhan could scold him, but he couldn't scold Mr. Chen. Chapter 5:19. With the idea of clearing Mr. Chen's name, Chonghua brazenly drew his sword. The 3-foot-long sword in his hand drew a semicircle in the air, and the tip of the sword pointed directly in Xianyuan Wuhan's direction. The distance between the two of them was about 20 meters. The moment Chonghua pointed his long sword at Xianyuan Wuhan sensed a strong murderous aura surging toward him. But what made Xianyuan Wuhan slightly surprised was, although Chonghua's murderous aura was strong, the long sword in his hand did not show any signs of vital essence fluctuation. It was just like a lifeless wooden stick. Xianyuan Wuhan looked at Chonghua with slight confusion. But then, he could not help but show a trace of seriousness on his face. No, something's wrong. Chonghua's murderous aura was so strong, but there was no sign of vital essence fluctuation around him. Under such circumstances, unless Chonghua was deliberately mystifying, this sword was definitely extraordinary. So, Xianyuan Wuhan immediately mobilized his vital essence and surrounded himself in it. At the same time, Chonghua had also finished accumulating power and raised his hand to wave the long sword in his hand. Mr. Wuhan, please enlighten me. Chonghua roared fiercely, and the long sword in his hand suddenly bloomed with a dazzling light. Before the sword was drawn, the sword chi became one, hidden but not released. the sword momentum was released. In an instant, like a long river hanging upside down, it soared into the sky and into the clouds. Wherever the sword light went, it could be said that heaven and earth lost their color, and the sun and moon turned away in shame. The ultimate sword was only for a moment of youth. Just as Xianxia waved this sword, the family head, who had been watching the battle in the air, suddenly changed his expression. This sword, why was it so similar to the rumors? As one of the three major families in Ningzhou, the Xianyuan family was naturally very concerned about the Tuoba family's change. There were rumors that the reason why Tuoba Yi was seriously injured and had to escape to death was because he was hit by Mr. Chen's sword. One had to know that Tuoba Yi was an Empyrean-level existence. But he couldn't even take one hit from Mr. Chen. Such a strange situation, just thinking about it made one's hair stand on end. After all, the outside world didn't know what exactly happened at that time, so it was inevitable that everyone would speculate too much about this incident. As the person involved in the incident, Tuoba Yi had been recuperating in seclusion. As for Taoist Master Void Peer Stage, due to his identity, it was impossible for him to personally appear and refute the rumors. This also caused the rumors to become more and more outrageous. Many people were even guessing whether Xianxia had already touched the threshold of the semi-sage realm. Otherwise, how could he explain his magnificent feat of fighting against 4 opponents in the Jade Pure Cave Heaven? Since Mr. Chen was so powerful, as his direct disciple, Xianxia should have learned something, right? The patriarch had high hopes for Xianxia, so he sent Xianyuan Wuhan to test Xianxia. The result was just as the patriarch had hoped. Xianxia was successfully enraged by Xianyuan Wuhan. Thus, he no longer held back, and his first move was a killing move. It was like pressing the shutter of a camera. As a strong light flashed, time suddenly stopped. Everyone felt their minds go blank. By the time they came back to their senses, Xianyuan Wuhan's tall and sturdy body that couldn't be considered to have landed directly flew backwards. Accompanied by a strong gust of wind, Xianyuan Wuhan fell heavily to the ground. Puff! There were no obvious wounds on Xianyuan Wuhan's body, but the violent impact still caused him some internal injuries, so he couldn't help but cough up a mouthful of blood. Xianxia? Looking at Xianyuan Wuhan, who fell heavily to the ground, everyone suddenly felt like they were dreaming. Are you satisfied now? This is a sword move that Mr. Chen taught me. However, Xianghua's aptitude is too low and he can't master the trick, so he can only barely make a pose. In fact, that sword move just now had exhausted all of Xianghua's vital essence, but in order to protect Mr. Chen's supreme reputation, Xianxia could only hold on to his last breath and pretended to be calm as he declared this victory declaration. After saying that, Xianxia turned around and left very confidently. Looking at his back as he left, a thoughtful expression suddenly appeared on Xianyuan Wuhan's face. From the moment Xianxia waved the long sword in his hand, winning or losing this competition was no longer important. He not only proved himself, but also indirectly defended Mr. Chen's reputation. This sword move was indeed very powerful. But with the cultivation of the patriarch and the 8 elders, how could they not see that Xianxia was already an arrow at the end of its flight at that time? Although Xianyuan Wuhan suffered internal injuries, he still had the ability to get up and fight again. Therefore, if they continued to fight, Xianxia might not even be able to take one move from Xianyuan Wuhan. However, this was only an internal competition within the family after all. Since Xianxia waved this sword move, then no matter what the result was, the patriarch would definitely guarantee that he would be in the top 3. In fact, when Xianxia showed that sword move, even the patriarch, who was watching the battle, could not help but be a little tempted. If he were to use such a miraculous sword technique, what kind of power would it display? Thinking of this, the patriarch could not help but want Xianxia to hand over the sword technique. However, due to Mr. Chen's illustrious reputation, he could only suppress this greed in his heart and ask Xianxia indirectly. However, Xianxia was not stupid. No matter how the patriarch probed, his response was always only one word, which was, sword one. It was neither the one sword concealing emptiness nor the great Qianyuan. It was a set of sword techniques that Xianxia created himself after hundreds of years of deliberation and deduction in the dark space after breaking through to the insightful emptiness realm. Because this set of sword techniques had been created not long ago and still needed to be perfected, Xianxia passed the first move to Chonghua and Yiji, only hoping to find more loopholes from them. Their cultivation was not high, so it was easier to see the problem when they used it. There were always risks in doing experiments, right? They were lucky that there were no problems. Therefore, when Xianxia passed on Sword 1 to them, he did not forget to repeatedly emphasize the risks involved. But the two of them were good. Not only were they not worried about whether they would be possessed by the devil, but they were diligently practicing every day, wishing that they could grasp this move in one go. In Xianxia's eyes, the two of them were experimental white mice. But in the eyes of others, the appearance of Sword 1 confirmed their identity as the supreme martial artist's disciples. Therefore, it had to be said that this was really a beautiful misunderstanding. Throughout Xianxia's life, the cultivation techniques he learned were all the top cultivation techniques in the world. First, there was the 49 styles of heaven evolution, then there was the Xian Tian Evil Emperor's saber and sword dual arts, and then there were the various treasured scriptures of the divine sect. As long as Xianxia could think of a cultivation technique, it was basically included in it. Could it be that Xianxia had nothing to do, so he wanted to create a set of cultivation techniques to play with? Of course, things were not that simple. Xianxia seemed to be creating his own cultivation technique, but in fact, he was refining what he had learned in his life. Just like the sentence he taught Chonghua, the most suitable for oneself was the best. Whether it was magic treasures or cultivation techniques, in fact, it was the same principle. At the insightful emptiness realm, the experience of predecessors could only be used as a reference. In the future, Xianxia still needed to walk down the road by himself. Rough iron ore could no longer meet the needs of the insightful emptiness realm, so Xianxia needed to smelt these iron ore until it was refined into steel, then he could continue to use it. Xianxia personally leaned toward sword techniques. Thus, he used the Moonlight Sword technique and Dark Valley Sword technique as the foundation to create a new cultivation technique that belonged to him. The name of this sword technique was very interesting. It was called Abundant Thought Sword Technique. The meaning was self-evident. Xianxia was too lazy to name it, so he used the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the order. The first style was called Sword 1, and the second style was called Sword 2. If not for the fact that he wanted to raise the level and show off a little, he would not even bother to use the traditional 1, 2, and 3. After all, wouldn't Sword 1, Sword 2, and Sword 3 be easier to write? Let's talk about it. Recently, many authors are using the main character's group writing method. I also want to try it, so there is this plot. Actually, the story is still the same story, but the way it is written is different. If it was from Xianxia's point of view, then this story would be written in the future, and the development of the story would also be different. Maybe it's because my writing is not good enough, so the ending is not very good. So sad, but I will correct it. Humans always grow strong through stumbles, you just have to get used to it. Chapter 520. What was the true purpose of the Patriarch's clan meeting? Wasn't it to select the strongest gold core cultivators so that they could obtain enough benefits for the family from the great illusionary land? Therefore, after Chonghua showed his strength, even if he didn't want to participate in any more competitions, the Patriarch would personally send him a spot to the great illusionary land. Of course, Chonghua wasn't very interested in the great illusionary land. After fighting with Xinyuan Wuhan, he only wanted to take advantage of the last few days of vacation to spend more time with his mother. Then, he would take the time to choose a few exquisite gifts for Nian Nian. After that, he could wait to return to Earth. Chonghua didn't know the importance of the great illusionary land, so he didn't know that the moment he took out Sword 1, the Patriarch had already made a decision. Next, even if he had to tie him up with a rope, he had to forcibly tie him up into the great illusionary land. After all, this was a major event that could affect the future development of the Xinyuan family. The Patriarch knew that Chonghua had a 7-day limit, but considering that Chonghua was only going to the great illusionary land for a while, it wasn't like he wouldn't come back, so he wasn't very worried about Xianxia holding him responsible in the future. For the patriarch, this was really a very simple choice. Even if he made the worst choice, it would only delay Chunghua for a while. Therefore, the patriarch would rather let Chunghua break his promise to Qinshi than miss this once-in-a-century opportunity. Whether it was for Chunghua or the Shenyuan family, the great illusionary land had great opportunities. Why would Shenyuan Wuhan rather forcibly seal his cultivation and waste 200 years than break through to the Yuaning realm? It was because the benefits that the great illusionary land could bring had far exceeded his expectations. There were too many people like Shenyuan Wuhan. Therefore, Chenghua's trip to the great illusionary land was imperative. Therefore, under the secret efforts of the various forces, the 3,000 candidates were quickly confirmed and reported to the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. When the three enclosures converged, it would be the start of the grand event. Now back to Qinshi. After he seriously discussed the issue of puppy love with the little fellow, Qinshi could finally put his hanging heart down for the time being. The cabbage at home hadn't even sprouted a bud yet, and the piglets outside already couldn't wait to eat it. Qinshi wanted to see who would dare. It had to be said that ever since Qinshi had taken precautions in his heart, he now felt that the other party was a thief, and the worst kind of vegetable thief. As a matter of fact, when Qinshi brought the little fellow to school the next day, an extremely serious expression hung on his face. His pair of eagle-like eyes were even more unbridled as they scanned the surroundings. With his current nervous appearance, those who didn't know better would probably think that he was transporting banknotes. By daddy, by mommy. Unlike Qinshi's vigilance, the little fellow behaved as usual, as if yesterday's love letter incident did not put too much of a psychological burden on her. Therefore, after she smiled and waved goodbye to her parents, she ran into the school gate like a wisp of smoke. As the class monitor, she naturally had to set an example. Therefore, she had to be the first to sit in the classroom before her classmates arrived. Nian had already woken up early enough, but there were still many children in the class who woke up earlier than her. It was not that these children were more diligent than her, but because most of these children lived far away, coupled with the fact that the morning rush hour in Shangjing was too congested, their parents had no choice but to send their children to school early every day and then rush to work. Living in Shangjing was really not easy. How could a rich second generation, like Nian, understand the hardships? As usual, when Nian arrived at the classroom, there were already a lot of people sitting sparsely in the classroom. Some children gathered together and chatted about games, while others chased and played at the back of the classroom. Not sure who shouted, "Class monitor is here," but a few mischievous children stopped what they were doing and returned to their seats. Looking at this situation, Nian, the class monitor, was almost synonymous with the teacher. Nian was very satisfied with the self-awareness of her classmates, so she went back to her seat. Because of yesterday's love letter incident, she did not immediately take out her textbook after putting down her bag. Instead, she bent down and looked at her drawer. Sure enough, there was another thing that did not belong to her. It was a piece of chocolate. Because Chunghua and Yiji loved to eat chocolate, Nian also ate a lot with them, so she could be considered as knowledgeable. This type of chocolate was very common in the supermarket, called Ferrero. Usually, there were 3 in a box, and a box cost 9 yuan. For adults, 9 yuan was naturally nothing, not to mention that there was only one here, and it did not even have a complete packaging. But for elementary school students who did not have much pocket money, Ferrero's status was far above spicy sticks and potato chips. After all, he only bought one for 3 yuan. You could only eat 1 bite each. From this, it could be seen that this anonymous confessor's feelings for Nian could be considered true love. The moment Nian saw the chocolate, she could not help but hesitate for a moment, then she took it out of the drawer. Regardless of who gave her this piece of chocolate, she would never eat it. Because, whether it was Qinshi or Aunt Zhang, both of them had taught her not to eat things given by others. Therefore, Nian did not even bat an eyelid. She took the chocolate, turned around, and walked directly to the trash can at the back of the classroom. Children who were arranged to sit next to the trash can by the teacher were usually the most mischievous children in the class. Therefore, when this child saw Nian throw the chocolate into the trash can, his eyes immediately lit up. "This is chocolate. Class monitor, you don't want it. Then I'll take it. This kid was very mischievous. He had already noticed that Nian was holding Ferrero's chocolate. The trash can had to be cleaned every afternoon, so the moment this golden chocolate fell into the trash can, this kid very quickly picked it up. It's delicious. This child's name was Lee Sanduo. His name was given casually, and so was his personality. He did not mind that the chocolate was picked up from the trash can at all. He tore open the packaging and ate it happily. Nian saw that he had picked up the chocolate and was about to return to her seat. At this moment, Lee Sanduo suddenly called out to her. Class monitor, if there's more good food in the future, don't throw it away, give it to me, I'll help you eat, okay? Chapter 521. Speaking of which, Lee Sanduo was actually quite interesting. He wasn't tall, about half a head shorter than Nian, so he was one of the shortest in the class. Even so, this kid relied on his usual outstanding performance to get the teacher to arrange him in the last row, near the trash can at the back door. From this, it could be seen how mischievous this kid was in the teacher's eyes. Lee Sanduo was indeed very mischievous. However, his mischievousness was very different from other children. Perhaps it was because of his more antisocial personality. Lee Sanduo didn't have many friends in class, so when he had nothing to do, he would be alone in the last row, fiddling with something. Lee Sanduo never played around with his classmates, nor did he like to bully others, but he had a very bad habit that the teacher disliked, and that was that he liked to interrupt during class. Just like a comedian, no matter what the teacher said on stage, he would always be the first to respond, and then make the whole class burst into laughter. In any case, he was a third-grade student, but he always pretended to be stupid in class, deliberately disrupting the class discipline, so the teacher naturally disliked him. They weren't afraid of students being mischievous, but they were afraid of students being unreasonable. Obviously, Lee Sanduo belonged to the latter. It was unknown where this habit of his came from. After repeatedly failing to change, the teacher completely lost patience with him. One must know that this was the capital's affiliated primary school, and the teacher's shoulders carried a lot of pressure. The third grade was a very important turning point. Lee Sanduo didn't like to study, but he actually wanted to affect others' studies. How could the teacher tolerate this? Therefore, the teacher simply moved him to the last row, so that he wouldn't affect the other students. This was a warning. Lee Sanduo didn't necessarily understand, but his parents definitely understood. If he continued to mess around like this, it wouldn't be a matter of changing seats, but a matter of persuading him to transfer schools. A weirdo like Lee Sanduo wasn't very common. Although Nian didn't like him interrupting the teacher in class, that was another matter. Nian didn't hate him because of that. Therefore, after hearing Lee Sanduo's words, Nian turned to look at him, and then began to think seriously. Economy is a virtue. Wasn't there a famous quote hanging on the classroom wall? Anyway, it would be a waste to throw it away. If Lee Sanduo wanted to eat it, then let him have it. All right. Thank you, class leader. Lee Sanduo seemed to know who put the chocolate in Nian's drawer, so when he saw Nian nod in agreement, his face showed a very happy smile. Oh yeah. Now, he would have chocolate to eat every day. The result was just as Lee Sanduo had expected. For the next week, Nian would come to class every morning and find a piece of Ferrero chocolate in her drawer. Actually, she could have asked Big Cat to use its sense of smell to find this guy who had been secretly giving her gifts. However, considering that she didn't want to have any interaction with this person, Nian pretended that nothing had happened. After receiving the chocolate every day, she would give it to Lee Sanduo as soon as possible. 3 yuan worth of Ferrero chocolate. She gave it to him for a week. This was King True Love. Under the nourishment of these love chocolates, Lee Sanduo's complexion seemed to be a lot rosier than before. Even his thin and small figure showed signs of breaking out of the soil and growing at this moment. Lee Sanduo was very grateful for Nian's generosity. Therefore, he now looked forward to tomorrow every day, hoping that he could eat such delicious chocolate tomorrow morning. But unfortunately, Lee Sanduo's yearning for a happy life didn't last long before it completely came to an end. Early in the morning, after Nian came to class, She habitually looked down at her drawer as usual. Because she didn't see any chocolate, she couldn't help but be stunned. It couldn't be helped. Who asked her to develop a habit? Although she was a little surprised, Nian didn't take it to heart. It was better if no one disturbed her. Anyway, she would never fall in love with anyone early. Absolutely impossible. Without the chocolate, Nian naturally didn't need to deal with these things. Therefore, she subconsciously looked back, wanting to tell Lee Sanduo that she didn't receive any chocolate today, so that Lee Sanduo wouldn't have to wait there helplessly. However, after Nian turned back, she suddenly realized. Lee Sanduo was like a frosted eggplant today, hugging his head and curling up in his seat. Looking from afar, he gave off a delicate and pitiful feeling. According to Lee Sanduo's casual personality, even if he was scolded by the teacher, the expression on his face wouldn't change at all. Why did he seem like a different person today? Nian felt that it was a little strange. Out of concern for her classmate, after she put away her bag, she went straight to Lee Sanduo's side. Lee Sanduo, what's wrong with you? Hearing this, Lee Sanduo buried his head on the table and didn't move at all. Nian couldn't help but worry, so she reached out and gently pushed him twice. Are you sick? Do you want me to help you apply for leave? Under Nian's constant questioning, Lee Sanduo finally sat up from the table. However, he didn't immediately raise his head. Instead, it was as if someone had discovered a shameful secret. He impatiently waved his hand and said, I'm fine, don't bother me. What's wrong with you? Nian felt that his reaction was very strange, so she couldn't help but bend down so that her eyes were level with Lee Sanduo's head. Then, she saw the expression on his face. Lee Sanduo seemed to be crying. Nian's eyesight was very good, so she immediately saw something strange on Lee Sanduo's face. Lee Sanduo's right cheek was a little red, and she could faintly see that it was a slap mark, plus the tear stains at the corner of his eyes. Looking at this situation, it seemed like he was bullied. This was bad. The little guy exploded on the spot. You're crying? Who bullied you? Tell me. I'll tell the teacher. Not to mention that she was now the class monitor. Even if she didn't have any position, Nian would never allow bullying in her class. Because her father once said, we must firmly say no to bullying in school. Seeing that Lee Sanduo was like a coward who only knew how to lie on the table and cry, Nian was suddenly a little angry. Thus, she grabbed Lee Sanduo's arm, pulled him up from his seat, and shouted angrily, Lee Sanduo, stand up. Tell me who bullied you. I'll help you. Chapter 522. Although Nian didn't understand the specific meaning of the 8 words, eliminate evil and defend justice, for the time being, this didn't stop her from having a warm-hearted heart that loved to fight for justice. Just like what her father usually taught her, regardless of status, background, knowledge, or upbringing, people need to respect each other. It was obvious that bullying others was a form of disrespect. Regardless of whether it was her or others who were bullied, Nian would never allow such things to happen around her. Therefore, after confirming that Lee Sanduo was bullied, Nian immediately took out her position as the class monitor and fiercely wanted to fight for justice for Lee Sanduo. Tell me who bullied you? Perhaps because she was angry, Nian's words were powerful and resonating. Her voice was very loud and instantly attracted the attention of the other students. In a moment, Lee Sanduo, who was forcefully dragged out of his seat by Nian, became the focus of everyone's attention. According to Lee Sanduo's personality, he definitely wouldn't care about how others looked at him. In fact, he might even be proud of himself. But Lee Sanduo didn't know what was wrong with him today, but when he realized that the other students were looking at him, his face suddenly flushed red. Following that, he shouted at Nian with an agitated face, "It's none of your business. Go away." As he said that, he struggled with all his might, as if he wanted to break free from Nian's grip. Seeing Lee Sanduo's extreme reaction, Nian could only resentfully withdraw her hand. Lee Sanduo. Nian originally wanted to persuade him, but this Lee Sanduo seemed to have eaten gunpowder. Not only did he not accept Nian's concern, he even straightened his neck and shouted at her, "Go away. It's none of your business. What does it have to do with you?" Annoying. Since he had already said that, Nian Nian naturally couldn't say anything more. She could only helplessly turn around and return to her seat. What did it mean to grieve for misfortune and be angry for failure to fight? That was it. Compared to high school, school bullying was actually more common in elementary and middle school. The so-called school bullying was actually bullying other students through beating, insulting, and mocking. There were two types of people who were the easiest to bully. One type was introverted and cowardly. Even if they were bullied, they would endure it out of fear and thus be bullied for a long time. The other type was those who were flamboyant and liked to show off their uniqueness. Children with this type of character wouldn't care about other people's feelings and would easily attract the attention of the bullies. Lee San Duo obviously belonged to this type of bully. What was important to note here was that bullies were usually members of a small group. Therefore, once there was bullying, it was usually a group of people who committed the crime together. Lee San-duo's personality seemed casual and undisciplined. He would make the teacher angry in class whenever he had nothing to do. In fact, it was clear that he was a rather proud and solitary person. It was difficult for people like him to make friends. Thus, he could only use all kinds of outrageous behavior to gain more attention and cover up the loneliness in his heart. It was also because of this that Lee San-duo would rather suffer silently than show his weak side in front of others. He didn't need anyone's help, whether it was his parents, teachers, or classmates. The only one who could help him was himself. Thus, even if he was bullied today, Lee San-duo didn't need any help, because he wouldn't easily bow down and admit defeat. Nian Nian couldn't figure out these complicated problems at the moment. Thus, her thoughts at the moment were very simple. That was, to help Lee San-duo get rid of the bullies. To achieve this goal, Nian Nian purposely observed Lee San-duo for a long time today. However, throughout the day, Lee San-duo didn't show any signs of abnormality. During class, he would still interrupt the teacher's lecture. After class, he would quietly sit in his seat. During this period, he didn't interact with anyone. Thus, Nian Nian couldn't tell who was bullying him. Without catching the culprit, Nian Nian couldn't help even if she wanted to. Thus, she could only watch from the side. It wasn't easy to wait until school was over, but Lee San-duo ran away with his school bag. This made Nian Nian, who wanted to know more about the case, feel a little depressed. She had no choice but to complain to her father. As usual, Xianxia arrived at the school gate on time. When Nian Nian came to his side, Xianxia picked her up from the ground. "Hey, what happened? Who made our little princess angry?" Since yesterday, when he learned that the little girl had begun to experience puppy love, Xianxia increased her security level. Thus, even if he was in the courtyard, he could check on the little girl's situation through the big cat. Thus, even without Nian Nian saying anything, Xianxia already knew what she had experienced today. The little girl couldn't figure out Lee San-duo's behavior, so she immediately told Xianxia the whole story. Seeing that the little girl was so warm-hearted, Xianxia naturally had to encourage her. Thus, after thinking for a while, he directly pointed out the key point. "Nian Nian, since Lee San-duo was already crying on the table when you saw him, that means he must have been bullied before you came to school. So if you want to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, you just have to wake up earlier in the future and be the first to go to class." Hearing this, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. What Daddy said made sense. No wonder she couldn't find the culprit. No matter how hard she tried, they committed the crime in the morning. "Then I have to wake up earlier tomorrow. Daddy, remember to call me. I want to protect Lee San-duo. I can't let him be bullied by others." Seeing the little girl's indignant look, Xianxia couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. To Xianxia, the importance of this matter might not be as important as the supermarket discount. But to the little girl, this was an important matter that was enough to establish her values. Thus, not only did Xianxia not interfere, but he also followed the little girl's request and waited until dawn the next day to pull her out of bed. "Wake up, my little hero. There are still people waiting for you to save them." The little girl was still a little dazed at first. After hearing Xianxia's words, she immediately turned over and jumped out of bed as if she had been injected with chicken blood. "Daddy, let's go." How could the great Supreme Chen's daughter be the kind of person with bad values? Born between heaven and earth, She naturally had to be a chivalrous person and uphold justice. Chapter 523. With a firm resolve to uphold justice, the little fellow woke up early in the morning, which was a rare occurrence. When the father and daughter took a taxi to school, they arrived almost an hour earlier than usual. The capital-affiliated elementary school did not have a boarding school. Even though it was still early in the morning, the school gate was already bustling with activity. As a parent, Xianxia naturally could not instigate Nian to fight. Regardless of whether he could win or not, fighting was definitely wrong. Thus, when he saw the little girl's excited face, Xianxia smiled and reminded her. However, it was just a reminder. From the beginning to the end, Xianxia had no intention of interfering in this matter. As long as Nian's starting point was correct, no matter what she wanted to do, as a father, he would support her with both hands and feet. School bullying, in fact, was just school violence. Many children were weak and did not dare to tell their teachers and parents even if they were bullied. Thus, once bullying occurred, it would usually last for a long time. Those who had not experienced such an incident would find it difficult to understand the despair and helplessness of the victims. Fear, helplessness, and panic. It was like a nightmare that pressured them to the point of suffocation, but the teachers and parents did not notice at all. They did not even dare to look at the bully. As long as the bully appeared in front of them, they would lower their heads and become silent dogs that only knew how to wag their tails and beg for mercy. This kind of thing was unavoidable. It was like a steel wire that was tied up and gradually tightened around the victim's heart. They were in pain, but they could not make a sound. Lu Sun once said, "If you do not explode in silence, you will perish in silence." There was a limit to everything. If Nian was willing to stand up and stop it, Xianxia would not let her stand aside and be a bystander. "Dad, don't worry. I won't fight with them. I just want to stop them from bullying Li San Duo." Adhering to the responsibility and awareness of being the class leader, the little girl waved goodbye to Xianxia in high spirits, and then ran with big strides towards the teaching building. In the future, she would be the first to reach the classroom. Nian's classroom was on the 3rd floor. When she rushed to the classroom, there were already 2 or 3 students sitting in the classroom. She glanced at the back of the classroom and saw that Li San Duo was not there yet. Thus, she returned to her seat and habitually looked at her drawer. Fortunately, there was no chocolate. It was still early, and even the teacher hadn't arrived at school yet, so after waiting for a while, Nian temporarily put these distracting thoughts behind her. She took out the textbook and began to review it seriously. In fact, she was not sure if Li San Duo would be bullied today. However, it was best if it did not happen. The only thing she could do was to stand up and stop the bullying as soon as it happened again. Nian was to study. As time passed, there were more and more people in the classroom. Perhaps it was because Nian had come too early today, so the children who usually liked to chase and play at the back of the classroom didn't make a fuss today for the first time. Instead, they sat obediently in their seats as soon as they entered the classroom. Taking advantage of the fact that class had not started yet, many students started to chat in low voices. But at this moment, a piercing cat's cry suddenly came from outside the window. Meow! Meow meow meow. After hearing this familiar voice, Nian immediately looked out the window. She saw the big cat lying on a tree branch and staring at the little girl with its faintly glowing eyes. When Nian noticed it, the big cat gently wagged its tail and quietly jumped to another tree branch. Nian understood what it meant. So, without thinking, she stood up and quickly ran out of the classroom. The big cat moved around the tree while Nian chased after it in the corridor. When she ran into a classroom in the corner, the big cat finally stopped. There was a situation here. Nian looked up at the door sign and realized that she was in the music classroom. The door of the classroom was tightly shut. Nian subconsciously pressed her ear against the door and listened. She immediately heard some movement from within. There was someone inside. The big cat never did anything meaningless. Since it spoke, it meant that something must have happened. Hence, Nian didn't think too much about it and tried to twist the doorknob. The door was not locked. Nian pushed the door open and went in. At this moment she suddenly realized. In this half-empty music classroom, there were 6 or 7 people standing there. Seeing this, Nian could not help but be stunned. She glanced at the people in front of her and saw a familiar figure. She could not help but ask, "Li Sanduo? Why are you here?" There were 7 people in the classroom. Li Sanduo was alone in the corner of the back door. The other 6 people were in a semicircle, surrounding him. Nian's sudden appearance seemed to have frightened these mischievous bullies. Hence, when they heard her voice, the children who were originally facing away from her all turned to look at her in unison. The situation was awkward. Nian and these people stared at each other. After a few seconds of silence, one of the people who seemed to be the leader reacted. He quickly whispered to his companions, "Let's go." This person was tall and muscular. He looked like he was at least a 6th grade student. Perhaps it was because he was older, but to Nian, this guy looked ferocious. She was stunned on the spot. There were no instruments in the music classroom, so the door was not locked. The leader of the group had a high reputation. After he gave the order, the other children followed behind him and walked out of the back door. However, just as they were about to leave, Nian clearly saw. The leader of the group suddenly kicked Li Sanduo's inner side, causing Li Sanduo's body to sway. If not for the wall supporting him, he would have fallen to the ground. At this moment, Nian finally regained her senses. So, Li Sanduo was bullied by these people? She looked at Li Sanduo, who was curled up in the corner, and then looked at the group of people who were swaggering towards her. At that moment, driven by a sense of justice, Nian rushed to the corridor and opened her arms to block the group of people. "Stop! You're not allowed to leave. Someone said that I should observe children more, so I'm very confused. Haven't you experienced these situations before? Or have you forgotten? Why can I remember what I did in elementary school so clearly? I don't need to observe because I'm writing about myself. Is there a problem? Maybe it's because I've been living in the dormitory since the first year, so I've seen more things than you guys. Tell me a story that's hard to talk about." I once saw 2 boys hiding in the toilet and fighting with bayonets. My God, I was shocked at the time. This scene cast a huge shadow on my young heart. I probably won't be able to forget it for the rest of my life. Wonderful Book House. Com. Chapter 524. The teaching building of the capital affiliated primary school was an outer corridor. Nian was blocking the front door, so she blocked the only way out for this group of people. Although she was only a little more than 1.2 meters tall, when she bravely stood in front of the crowd, her small figure suddenly seemed infinitely taller. "Don't leave. You have to apologize to Li Sanduo. Or I'll tell the teacher. Tell him you bullied him." Nian took out her trump card. For the lower grade students, the class leader's report was naturally quite lethal. However, to these senior school tyrants in front of them, how could such a weak threat be able to scare them? To put it bluntly, even if the teacher came today, they would at most be frightened for a while, then they would quickly calm down. Anyway, the teacher couldn't punish them physically. In the end, the only method that could be used was to call the parents. But if calling the parents was useful, how could they develop such a bad habit of doing things unscrupulously and without respect for others? Therefore, this was a paradox in itself. The fundamental reason why school bullying did not stop, and even had a tendency to become more and more intense, was the fundamental reason why school bullying did not stop. After all, the teachers did not have clairvoyant eyes and ears, so before they had absolutely strong evidence, the teachers could only use verbal warnings to prevent bullying from happening again. But it was a pity, some people were born bad. With Wuxia's current education system, unless the situation was out of control, the teachers would never easily expel or dissuade a student. And this also meant that once the victim chose to endure, the bullying would continue until he graduated or transferred schools. Years of bullying and oppression, to a child whose mind was not yet fully developed, what kind of cruel torture would that be? There was no junior high school in the capital, so the 6th grade students were the most powerful existence in the school. Therefore, when facing a 3rd grade girl like Nian, the leading child did not take her threats seriously. Children at this age already knew the difference between boys and girls, so he did not deliberately make things difficult for Nian. Instead, he said impatiently, "Go away." The group of people did not stop walking. Soon, they arrived in front of Nian. Nian tried to reach out and stop him, but he pushed her aside with his long arms and legs. Things were getting out of hand. Before Nian could react, the big cat, who had been observing the situation from the tree, was the first to explode. Meow! As if someone had stepped on its tail, the big cat let out a fierce howl and crouched on the tree trunk, ready to pounce. But just as it was about to pounce, the big cat seemed to have received some sort of command, and its body suddenly froze in place. Both of its ears trembled slightly, and its tensed body immediately relaxed. Then, it returned to its soft and feeble state. Meow! The big cat obediently laid back down, as if nothing had happened. The children had no idea that they had just walked through the gates of hell. Because of the seal in her body, even though Nian had already started cultivating, the strength of her body did not change much. Therefore, after being pushed hard by the leader of the children, Nian immediately staggered and leaned against the railing of the corridor. From the beginning to the end, the leader of the children did not take her seriously. But he did not expect, after being pushed away, Nian immediately went forward and grabbed his arm, then shouted angrily, "You're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to leave." This completely angered the other party. After all, he was a 6th grade student. Facing Nian, who had skipped a grade to become a 3rd grade, he naturally had an absolute advantage in terms of physical strength. So, he immediately grabbed Nian's wrist and used all his strength to twist her fingers. "Let go. Believe it or not, I'll beat you up. Get out of my way." An absurd farce was suddenly staged. Nian held on tightly to the person's arm, and the leader of the children struggled with all his might. After a few seconds of entanglement, the other party suddenly lost his patience. So, he no longer cared about gender differences and raised his leg to kick Nian. Seeing this, the big cat could only helplessly close its eyes. It had no choice. She did not allow it to interfere. Bang! The big cat did not stop him, and Nian's calf suffered a heavy kick. This was great. Nian was completely angered by the other party's actions. Do you still remember what Daddy said? We don't bully others, but we definitely can't let others bully us. So, she immediately copied the other party, raised her right leg, and without a word, kicked over. Moreover, her kick was even more ruthless and decisive than the other party's. After being kicked by her, the expression on the leader's face was very interesting. "You still dare to fight back? Brothers, beat her up for me." The other children had some reservations, but after seeing that Nian dared to fight back, they swarmed over. They wanted to gang up on Nian, just like when they ganged up on others in the past. Meow. The big cat could not bear to watch any longer. But just as it stood up again and was about to jump over to interfere, a thin figure suddenly rushed out from the front door. Crack! A crisp sound was heard, and everyone, including Nian, could not help but turn to look. It was Xianxia. After seeing that Nian was being ganged up on, this kid suddenly had the courage to pick up a plastic broom and hit the back of one of the children who was standing there. After the child who was beaten felt the pain, he immediately let out a blood-curdling scream. Then, as if he had gone crazy, he turned around and rushed towards Xianxia. Then, he violently pressed Xianxia against the wall and started beating him up with all his might. After all, Nian was a girl, so when facing her, these children might not be able to do it. But if they wanted to hit Xianxia, these children would be more ruthless than the other. So, they immediately turned their muzzles and rushed towards Xianxia. Seeing this, Xianxia changed his usual cowardly image. Not only did he withstand the punches and kicks of everyone, but he also fought back with all his might. A huge battle suddenly broke out just like that. After hearing the sounds of fighting in the corridor, the children who were originally sitting in the classroom rushed out one after another. "There's a fight! There's a fight! Look, there's a fight over there! Go and tell the teacher." Chapter 525. Kids always like to join in the fun. Therefore, as soon as the fight started in the music room, the entire teaching building was in an uproar. Students from every class swarmed into the hallway to watch the fight. Some busybodies even put on a look of wanting to see the world in chaos, and actually clapped and cheered excitedly. There was still about half an hour before the morning reading time, so most of the teachers were already in the office, eating breakfast and chatting. "Look, there are kids fighting outside." One of the teachers heard the commotion outside and immediately went to the window to take a look. What he saw was a big deal. The teacher was so scared that he threw away the soy milk and bread in his hand, and then rushed out of the office in a hurry. One must know that this was a primary school in the capital. Once a fight broke out, not only would the school punish the child involved, but they would also hold the teacher responsible for the child's class. Including Xianxia, there were not only 2 kids pushing and pulling each other in the hallway, but as many as 7 or 8. Therefore, the nature of this matter had escalated to the level of a gang fight, which was why it caused such a big commotion. They were in a gang fight. Everyone stop. What are you doing? The first to arrive at the scene was a PE teacher. Primary school PE teachers were very different from middle school PE teachers. Because he often taught the children broadcast gymnastics, the teacher recognized the leading child at a glance. "Li Hu, stop it." Li Hu and his brothers were squeezing Li Sanduo into a corner, so they did not notice the PE teacher's appearance at all. At this time, Xianxia, who had been standing at the back, saw the teacher's arrival. One had to admit that this little thing was quite clever. After seeing the PE teacher appear, she immediately took a few steps back, then pointed at the group of people in front of her and said righteously, "Teacher, they're bullying Li Sanduo. I'm helping him." Until now, the children still did not notice the PE teacher's appearance. "All of you stop." Seeing this, the PE teacher could not help but be a little angry. After a violent shout, he directly reached out and grabbed one of the children's ears, then pulled the child out of the crowd. "Stand still. Don't move. If you dare to move again, I'll slap you." The physical education teacher also had a bad temper. He was not polite to these naughty kids at all. Under his tugging and kicking interference, Li Hu and the others immediately retreated to the side like mice seeing a cat, hanging their heads and not daring to move. Li Sanduo was thin and small to begin with. In addition, Li Hu and the others were mostly 6th graders, so the PE teacher could tell who was the victim at a glance. "Which class are you from? Are you okay?" As he spoke, the teacher pulled Li Sanduo to his side and helped him pat off the footprints on his body. Even though primary school students were a little reckless when fighting, they weren't very strong, so Li Sanduo didn't have any serious external injuries. But even so, Li Sanduo's face was suffused with a strange layer of redness. She reckoned that it wouldn't be long before this child turned into a swollen pighead with bruises all over his face. With the timely intervention of the PE teacher, this farce finally came to an end. Then, all the participants of the fight, including Xianxia, were brought to the principal's office by the teacher. "Tell me, why did you fight?" The nature of today's incident was too bad, so it could only be handled by the principal himself. At this time, Li Hu and the others finally realized what they had done today. Therefore, after hearing the principal's question, the few children were like frosted eggplants, not daring to even breathe loudly. "Teacher, let me tell you." The little girl came to the principal's office as a witness of this incident. She was a girl, plus she was young and her usual performance was very good, so when the PE teacher saw Xianxia, he thought of her as a good student, a good class monitor who came to stop the fight. This was the natural advantage of being a top student. No matter how Li Hu defended himself, the principal would not listen to his explanation. Instead, he thought that this naughty kid was hopeless. Therefore, Xianxia, with the principal's intention to side with her, confidently told the whole story. Of course, she was telling the story from her own perspective. From her point of view, Li Sanduo was an innocent victim. After being targeted by Li Hu and the others for no reason, Li Sanduo could only silently endure Li Hu and the others' bullying. Therefore, no matter how the principal pursued the matter, in the end, it should not be Li Sanduo's fault. Li Sanduo was innocent. After hearing Nian Nian forcefully defend Li Sanduo, Li Hu and the others were a little unhappy. They saw Li Hu used his body to lightly bump the child beside him. Then, the child seemed to have been provoked by something and could not help but explain with a red face, "It's not like that. Li Sanduo stole my chocolate. I asked him to return it to me. He didn't give it to me. That's why we hit him." In the end, the child seemed to have realized that hitting people was wrong, so his voice suddenly became low. Seeing this, the principal did not immediately speak. Instead, he looked thoughtfully at Nian Nian. The principal originally wanted to use the confrontation between the two sides to clarify the entire matter so that he could give an absolutely fair punishment. Who would have thought? After being glanced at by the principal, Nian Nian said very honestly, "I gave the chocolate to Li Sanduo." After saying this, Nian Nian was still a little afraid that the principal would not believe her, so she told him about the love letter and chocolate that she received previously. Now this was great. After hearing Nian Nian's story, the child's little face flushed red all the way to his ears. He was so embarrassed that he did not even dare to raise his head. "What's your name?" The principal was not asking Nian Nian, but the unlucky one who had a crush on her. My name is Zhu Xingyu. Which class are you from?" "Third year, class 1. At that moment, the principal suddenly understood the entire situation. Thus, after waving his hand to let Nian Nian and Li Sanduo leave first, the principal turned his head to look at Zhu Xingyu calmly and said, "Zhu Xingyu, right? Come here for a moment. There's a phone here. Do you know your parents' phone number? Come, give them a call." After hearing the principal's words, the child named Zhu Xingyu immediately burst into tears. It was obvious that this child knew what it meant to call his parents. However, all of this had nothing to do with Nian Nian anymore. Li Sanduo and Nian Nian walked out of the principal's office side by side. At this time, class had already started, so the entire school returned to its usual tranquility. The two of them were silent. Li Sanduo suddenly thought of something, then he said to Nian Nian with a serious face, "Thank you." This time, Li Sanduo did not call Nian Nian class monitor in a sarcastic manner. Instead, he called her name seriously. Chen Yan. Chapter 526. After writing, deleting, and writing, he was still not satisfied. He really couldn't afford to do it now. Sleep, I'll fight again tomorrow. I can't finish writing, returning from cultivation to become a stay-at-home dad. Please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 527. In the face of school bullying, silence was not a good solution. Silence was a disguised form of retreat. So instead of hoping that the bad guys would be kind and show mercy, it was better to tell them with the most firm attitude, "We're not that easy to bully. Maybe I can't beat you, but I'm definitely not afraid of you. If you kick me, I'll return the favor with a punch. As long as I don't fall, I'll never bow down to evil." Li Sanduo really experienced this feeling today. Although he had been beaten up so badly that he was limping a little, he was still able to walk. But at least at this moment, Li Sanduo was still in a very good mood. It had to be said, it felt good to use his fists to win respect for himself. Recalling the bravery he displayed at the critical moment, Li Sanduo suddenly felt as if he had been injected with chicken blood. He walked with vigor and vigor. "Class monitor, don't worry. If they dare to cause trouble in the future, I'll never be afraid of them again. So what if they have more people? I'll punch them until they cry." Like all boys, Li Sanduo's performance before and after the incident was like a different person. He kept bragging about his brave performance just now. But after Nian Nian heard it, she kept her head down and didn't say a word. It was not good to show off without support. So, Li Sanduo couldn't help but poke Nian Nian, then asked with a puzzled face, "Class monitor, what's wrong with you?" Nian Nian glanced at him, but still ignored him. Instead, she frowned slightly and muttered to herself, No, Auntie didn't teach me that. When Li Hu kicked me, I should have used my knee to block his foot, then raised my elbow to hit his chin. That way, he would have instantly lost his ability to fight." As he spoke, The little guy even began to mimic the movements of his hands. Qin Shueqing taught her some basic martial arts moves, but she was still young, so she couldn't understand the subtleties. Therefore, after everything had been settled, she finally remembered the moves that Qin Shueqing had taught her. Nian Nian gestured as if there was no one around. After seeing this scene, Li Sanduo's expression was very interesting. That's right. Wasn't the main culprit who started this war the class leader who always acted like a good student in front of him? If it wasn't for the class monitor, would Li Sanduo be able to walk out of the principal's office unscathed today? Thinking of this, Li Sanduo didn't dare to say another word. As the two of them returned to the classroom under the watchful eyes of the entire class, the farce finally came to an end. After Li Hu and his group were severely warned by the principal, they were completely dispirited. After that, not only did Li Sanduo never see them again, but even Nian Nian's drawer didn't have chocolate anymore. Now that he thought about it, Nian Nian seemed to have suffered a loss. Life returned to its usual tranquility. The weather in Shangjing gradually became hot. The tea house welcomed the peak season again, but unfortunately, its owner was no longer in the mood to run it. Because of this, Gu Lao had to make a special trip to the Sai courtyard to drink tea with Qin Shi under the old locust tree. The two played chess and chatted. Their days were particularly comfortable. The life of a retired veteran was probably like this. Early in the morning, Chen Shi sent Nian Nian to school. Not long after returning to the courtyard, there was a rush of knocking outside the courtyard. He thought that Gu Lao was here to drink tea again, so he opened the door with a smile on his face. But what Chen Shi didn't expect was, when he opened the door, it wasn't Gu Lao who appeared in front of him, but a man and a woman. Chen Shi knew these two people. The man was called Xiao Wang, and the woman was called Xiao Lu. The two belonged to the Wulian inspection office and were responsible for monitoring him. The year before last, at the request of Qin Yongwang, they delivered a car to his family. What's the matter? Chen Shi wasn't a voyeur, so under normal circumstances, he didn't release his divine sense to pay attention to the situation around him. After all, he lived in the capital of the country and in the most central part of the city. Naturally, he didn't have to worry too much about safety. Anyway, as long as no one broke into the courtyard, Qin Shi didn't care. Mr. Qin, it's like this. Seeing that Qin Shi's attitude was still mild, the young man called Xiao Wang hesitated for a moment before he said, "We just received an emergency report that someone may cause trouble on Chang'an Street tomorrow. Hohai is not far from Chang'an Street. The leader is worried that if there is an accident, it may affect you. So, he asked us to inform you in advance so that you can prepare in advance." After hearing what Xiao Wang said, Qin Shi was instantly amused. Wang Chuanju's arrangement was a bit interesting. What was Chang'an Street? The first street of Wuxia. Not only was there the Forbidden City and Tiananmen Square on this street, but there was also Zongnanhai and the Great Hall of the People. Who would dare to cause trouble in such a place? They must have eaten too much, right? Chen Shi subconsciously felt that this matter was a bit ridiculous. After he pondered for a moment, he suddenly realized the deeper meaning of it. It turned out that Wang Chuanju was giving him a heads-up. Since Wu Lian had already sent someone to inform him, it meant that this matter wasn't groundless. Something big was going to happen tomorrow. After all, things were not the same as before. Now that the internet was so advanced, once something happened on Chang'an Street, it would spread throughout the country and even the world in an instant. How embarrassing would that be? It would be embarrassing for the whole country. It was said that the security at the entrance of the Forbidden City was very strong, but had there been any lack of incidents on Chang'an Street over the years? For example, the Jinshui Bridge incident, the Founding Gate incident, the self-immolation incident, it would be embarrassing to pick out any one of them. Why did Wang Chuanju specifically send someone to inform him? It was to prevent the situation from getting out of control, so she wanted Qin Shi to act as insurance. What was prevention? That was to nip all the criminals in the bud before they started their illegal activities. Could it be that they had to wait for the other party to blow up Chang'an Street and directly commit a crime before they could arrest them? What a joke! Nothing must happen on Chang'an Street. Therefore, Wu Lian had to catch them all in one fell swoop before they took action. Although Xianxia made it clear that he wouldn't help Wu Lian do anything, this happened in front of his house. Could he just sit by and do nothing? If the troublemakers were forced to do something desperate by Wu Lian and did something shocking, they would naturally need Xianxia's help to resolve all of this in time to avoid causing panic among the people. There was nothing wrong with Wang Chuanju's arrangement. However, what made Xianxia feel slightly strange was, who exactly was the troublemakers tomorrow? Who would make Wu Lian put on such a big show and even need him to act as the last safety guarantee? Chapter 528. Xianxia was very curious about what would happen tomorrow, so he asked Xiaowang in detail. But no matter how he probed, Xiaowang refused to reveal any details. He didn't know if he really didn't have enough authority, or Wang Chuanju deliberately told him not to say anything. In short, no matter what the truth was, Xianxia's curiosity was successfully aroused by Xiaowang. It was said that within 10 years, Wuxia would have a total of 96 new types of frigates, including aircraft carriers, and officially enter the naval establishment. Under such circumstances, there were still people who dared to make trouble on Chang and Street. It had to be said that they were really courageous. As an outstanding young man of the new era who grew up singing, "I love Beijing's Tiananmen Square, the sun rises on Tiananmen Square," as long as Xianxia thought about what might happen tomorrow on Chang and Street, he really wanted to immediately move a small stool to the front row to occupy a good seat. This was a very pure family plot, and it had nothing to do with personal experience. As long as one was not born rebellious, one would have a special feeling for the homeland that raised them. Homeland, homeland, homeland. That was the meaning. Of course, with Xianxia's current cultivation, he could basically be regarded as a god who lived on Earth. Gods would not intervene in the affairs of the mortal world, but they would always pay attention to every move in the mortal world. And this kind of behavior that clearly had the ability to intervene, but chose to stay out of it to watch the fun, was often said to be eating melons. Just like the little girl who watched the trailer of a certain animated movie, after watching the trailer, she would naturally wait in front of the TV on time, only hoping that the movie was more exciting than the trailer. Xianxia was such a qualified melon eater now. Therefore, early the next morning, after Xianxia sent Nianyan to school again, he directly released his divine sense. From Jiangwimen to Fuxing Gate in the west. With Tiananmen Square as the center, any movement within a radius of 10 kilometers was under his control. Xiaowang did not lie to him. On this day, the Forbidden City was still open to the public, but the security forces on Tiananmen Square were obviously more than usual. It could be said that there was a sentry every 3 steps and a sentry every 5 steps. In addition to these guards on the surface, there were also many plainclothes people disguised as tourists wandering around the square. On the surface, everything was as usual, but secretly, they were jittery and paranoid. It's a bit interesting, even snipers are here? Xianxia returned to the courtyard, but his attention was always on Chang and Street. In addition to a few snipers hidden on the viewing platform, there were 3 buses with travel agency signboards parked not far from the flag stand. There were nearly 100 people in the 3 cars. All of them were warriors, and most of them were at the level of transforming strength. In addition to these conventional arrangements, Xianxia also found that there was a celestial overseeing each of the 4 cardinal directions of the square. From this, it could be seen how much importance the Wu Lian attached to this impending big event. Because they did not know when the other party would take action, the guards on the square had to be in a state of high tension at all times so that they could control the troublemakers as soon as the incident happened and prevent the situation from escalating. In fact, since Qin Xueqing and the 300 deities of Daiyu Island were not present, it meant that the troublemakers could not pose a threat, so there was no need for the deities to suppress them. This was a contest between mortals. The reason why Wang Chuanju sent someone to inform Xianxia was mainly because Xianxia lived nearby. Once the situation changed and went out of the Wu Alliance's control, Xianxia would have to step in and resolve everything in time to prevent the innocent people from being alarmed. It had to be said that Wang Chuanju was very thoughtful. She did not even ask Xianxia for help, but she indirectly made Xianxia pay attention to this matter. As long as Xianxia paid attention to this matter, then everything else would be easy to deal with. It was not that Wang Chuanju was so shrewd that she even wanted to scheme against Jinxi, but because this matter was too important. After all, Tiananmen Square was the face of Wuxia, so no accidents could happen. Once the operation began, the Wu Lian would catch all these criminals in one fell swoop. Wang Chuanju's arrangement was very reliable. But what she did not expect was, after the Wu Lian had made all the preparations, there was still no sign of the troublemakers showing up. She sat on the rocking chair and waited from morning to afternoon. When the sun was about to set, the streets of Chang were still as peaceful as ever. The warm sunlight sprinkled on one's body, and a long wait inevitably made one feel sleepy. Boss, didn't the higher-ups say that something would happen today? How come we haven't even seen a single shadow after waiting for so long? Wait slowly. Are you still hoping for something to happen? Let me tell you, it's best if nothing happens. If something does, you'll cry. In a police car next to the square, two men in police uniforms were holding binoculars and chatting idly. Their task today was very simple, which was to maintain order at the scene to avoid causing panic among the crowd. As basic police officers, the two of them did not know what would happen today, but this did not prevent them from speculating. Something big was going to happen today. Therefore, the two of them were like Xianxia now, and even somewhat hoped that the troublemakers would show up soon. What time is it now? Let me see. They could not bring their phones on duty, so one of them raised his wrist and looked at it, then replied, it's already 4:30 in the blink of an eye. 4:30? The Forbidden City is about to close. Just as the two of them were busy lamenting the passing of time, an extremely sharp whistle suddenly sounded not far away. Whoosh! Those who did not know would think that it was the red armband at the traffic light intersection directing traffic, but after the two of them heard it, they immediately jumped out of the car as if they had received some kind of order. Quick! Set up the cordon! The whistle was the secret signal for this operation. Since the whistle sounded, it meant that the troublemakers had shown up. Just as expected. Just as the police were busy setting up the cordon and sealing off the square, the martial artists on the three buses also rushed out of the cars. When was the Forbidden City the most crowded? It was when it opened in the morning and when it closed in the afternoon. Therefore, after the whistle sounded, all the Wulian action personnel went against the flow of people and swarmed toward Tiananmen. At the same time, a tour group of about 30 to 40 people walked out of the entrance of the scenic area under the guidance of the tour guide. It's them, take them down. Chapter 529. Although today was not a holiday, the scenic spot was still crowded with tourists from all over the country. According to the latest information received, there were about 30 to 40 troublemakers, and they disguised themselves as a tour group to blend in with the tourists. Therefore, as soon as the operation personnel received the news, they immediately locked on to the tour group that had just passed through the end gate and was slowly walking toward Tiananmen Square. All groups, listen up, you must take down this group of people as soon as possible. Remember, if you encounter resistance during the mission, you can kill them on the spot. Move! In an instant, countless operation personnel disguised as tourists gradually flocked toward the tour group from all directions. However, when the operation personnel really approached the tour group and saw the faces of the troublemakers in front of them, they suddenly felt a storm in their hearts. Many people were so scared that they quickly stopped and began to hesitate whether to continue to go forward and arrest them. Are these the troublemakers mentioned in the emergency report? Before seeing this tour group, everyone thought that the target of today's mission was some kind of vicious and crazy terrorist. Who would have thought? At this moment, what appeared in front of them was actually a tour group of elderly people. The elderly people wore the same clothes. They wore a small red vest with the travel agency logo on their upper bodies and a white baseball cap on their heads. Among them, the older ones had white hair, so the operation personnel estimated that these elderly people were at least 70 or 80 years old. Even the youngest among them was about 60 or 70 years old. If this tour group was placed on Chang'an Street, it would probably be a superstar group of scammers. Who would dare to provoke such a team? Could it be Wu Lian's information was wrong? At that moment, Not only were the operation personnel in charge of the arrest a little confused, but even the supervisor behind them was stunned. While everyone was hesitating, this elderly tour group acted as though nothing had happened and walked past the Tiananmen Gate Tower casually. *CK. What the hell is your intelligence group doing? Come, I'll let you see with your own eyes. This is the King operation target you told me about. On the Tiananmen Square. The operations supervisor of this mission was communicating with the intelligence group in exasperation. These elderly people in front of him had trouble even walking. How could they be the troublemakers mentioned by the intelligence group? Isn't this nonsense? Don't worry, I'm checking the situation here, right? On the other end of the phone, the director of the intelligence group was also very anxious. How could such a big mistake be made? That's impossible. While the operation team and intelligence group repeatedly confirmed the target's information, the elderly tour group slowly walked out of the passage under the guidance of the tour guide and came directly under the president's statue. Soon after, a shocking scene occurred. After these old men walked out of the City Gate Tower's passageway, they neatly lined up in a 6x6 square formation as if they had rehearsed it beforehand. Then, they all sat cross-legged on the ground. From the beginning to the end, these elderly people did not make a single sound. Wait, something happened. They're staging a sit-in. Unlike ordinary protesters, this super Pengzi group was small in number and their behavior was very strange. The tour guide was the only middle-aged man. After seeing his tour group doing such a shocking thing, he did not stand up to stop them. Instead, he directly walked past the crowd and stood in the first row of the group. The tour guide stood while the elderly people sat. When the passing tourists saw this scene, they could not help but stop and stand nearby and whisper to each other. What's going on? What's going on? Is something big going to happen? Where's the phone? Take a picture. As more and more people gathered in the square. After taking a deep breath, the tour guide faced the elderly people and slowly sat on the ground. Then, the middle-aged man dressed as a tour guide recited in front of everyone in the room, with a cadence of intonation, "This is the beginning of the end. Xian cultivator, the ancestor of nature, and the great sect of thousands of people. It's profound, so it's called subtle. It's continuous, so it's called wonderful. It's high, so it covers the 9 heavens, so it's wide, so it covers the 8 corners. It's as bright as the sun and the moon, so fast as lightning. It's as bright as a flash, or drifting like a stream of stars, or rippling like a deep pool, or flying like a cloud." This passage came from a Taoist classic. Naturally, ordinary people would not understand what he was saying. But for the members of the operation group, this passage was no less shocking than a sudden clap of thunder. It was inexplicably shocking. This is a cultivation technique? He's preaching? Quick, stop him. Hearing the manager's angry roar from the headset, the staff suddenly came back to their senses. Then they no longer cared about shocking the world. In front of all the tourists present, they directly pounced on the elderly tour group fiercely. However, just as one of the operation members was about to get close to the elderly people, an invisible force suddenly sent him flying and he fell heavily on the wall of the tower. Bang! With a muffled sound, the operation member, who was only at the mid-stage of concealing strength, fainted on the spot. At this time, the manager of the operation group suddenly realized that these elderly people, who seemed to be on the verge of death, had secretly set up a defensive array under the tower according to the arrangement of the 36 Big Dipper gods. Fu Xian Dao, obtain from the inside, guard from the outside, use from the spirit, forget from the weapon. This is the essence of Xian Dao. Obtain from the noble, do not wait for the power of the yellow axe. The body is rich, do not need the rare goods. Too high to be climbed, too deep to be fathomed. Riding on the flowing light, driving the flying scenery, penetrating the 6 void, penetrating the cold. Beyond the supreme, into the supreme. The tour guide sitting at the front did not seem to notice Wu Lian's sudden action at all. He still closed his eyes and continued to recite to himself. The onlookers did not know the truth. They only felt that this person's behavior was a little strange, so they used their mobile phones to record the entire process of him preaching. Back off, back off. Stop taking pictures. We are carrying out a special mission. Please cooperate with us. Thank you. After all, this incident happened under the Tower of Tian and Men. The operation members did not dare to forcibly break the array, so they could only temporarily drive the onlookers away from the scene. Hey, what are you doing? Why are you pushing me? Which department are you from? How would I know who you are without a uniform? I'm telling you, you better show some respect. I'm not leaving. What can you do about it? Come on, come hit me. Wu Lian wanted to clear the area, but the onlookers did not agree. The elderly tour group in front of them did not kill anyone, and they did not set off any fire. What was wrong with them sitting there silently and watching from the side? Was it illegal to sit still? Was it illegal to watch from the side? Wang Chuanju had thought of everything, but she did not expect. Chapter 530. Come here to shock the virtues, spread the teachings under the gate tower. In this day and age, traffic could be converted into cash. As long as there were people watching online, there would naturally be money to be made. Therefore, as soon as this elderly tour group sat down, someone next to them picked up their phone and started filming the entire process. According to the Public Security Administration punishment law, this tour group's behavior had seriously disrupted the order of the square, so the square's security personnel had the right to expel them. The operation personnel wanted to forcibly take this elderly tour group away, but due to the fact that there were too many tourists around, they did not dare to make too much of a commotion. Since they could not force their way in, they could only set up a cordon and wait for backup. While the operation personnel were anxious, the middle-aged man dressed as a tour guide sat on the ground, turning a blind eye to everything that was happening around him. Even though Wu Lian's operation personnel had already stood in front of him and tried to dissuade him, he still ignored them. Instead, he continued to chant some kind of unknown scripture. The middle-aged man's voice was not loud, but everyone present could clearly hear the scripture he was chanting. This kind of behavior was a little strange no matter how one looked at it. It would definitely go viral on the internet. Therefore, many tourists directly picked up their phones and started filming the entire process, so this scene instantly spread all over the internet. Don't film. If you film again, I'll confiscate all their phones. Seeing that the situation was gradually getting out of control, the director in charge of this operation made a prompt decision and directly ordered the confiscation of everyone's phones. Some of the tourists were frightened and ran away on the spot. However, some tourists were very hot-tempered. Seeing that the operation personnel were about to confiscate their phones, not only did they not dodge, but they also pointed their cameras at the operation personnel and kept shouting, "Come, everyone, come and see, the security guards of Tiananmen Square are violently enforcing the law." For a moment, the situation was a little out of control. Just as Wu Lian was busy driving away the onlookers, the four celestial beings who had heard the news also arrived at the scene and directly launched a strong attack on the array formed by the elderly people. These elderly people seemed to have cultivation, but they had not been cultivating for long. Among them, the most powerful one had probably just touched the threshold of the Qi refinement stage. Therefore, as soon as the four celestial beings launched an attack, the entire array suddenly shook. But at this moment, the tour guide suddenly stopped chanting. Then he slowly stood up from the ground and said to the people around him, "Everyone, stop. I've done what I have to do. I'll go with you now." As soon as the middle-aged man finished speaking, the elders behind him all stood up from the ground and quickly walked to his side. From the looks of it, these old people in their 70s and 80s seemed to be following the lead of this middle-aged man. Seeing this, the operation personnel could not help but look at each other, as if they could not understand the actions of the person in front of them. "There are too many people here. Hurry up and take them away." After the middle-aged man surrendered, the supervisor quickly rushed down from the tower. For the sake of safety, the supervisor signaled for the operation personnel to handcuff all the old people in front of him. Regarding this, the middle-aged man in the lead seemed to be quite dissatisfied. Thus, he went directly to the supervisor and pleaded for these old people. These old people have only been cultivating with me for a short period of time. Today, they are only here to cheer for me. May I ask what crime they have committed? If you insist on denouncing them, then go ahead and take me back. This has nothing to do with them. Don't worry if I really want to cause trouble. Today, I won't preach here and I won't surrender without a fight. Hearing this, the supervisor had no choice but to take a serious look at the person in front of him. To be honest, if he really had to forcibly take these old people away in front of all the tourists present, there might be some bizarre negative news on the internet tomorrow. And according to the information that Wu Lian had received before, the instigator of everything today seemed to be this middle-aged man in front of him. Therefore, after hearing the middle-aged man's words, the supervisor immediately walked to the side. After a short discussion with the higher-ups, the final decision was made. Take this person back. The others go to the side and register in order. If there are no problems, let them go. The middle-aged man seemed to be very satisfied with this arrangement. Thus, he turned around and whispered some instructions to the old people. Then, he took the initiative to follow the supervisor into a bus not far away. Throughout the entire process, the old people present did not say a word. They all seemed to listen to the middle-aged man in front of them. Therefore, after the middle-aged man was taken away by Wu Lian, only a few old people could not suppress the sadness in their hearts and silently shed tears. On the bus, as usual, Wu Lian began to interrogate the middle-aged man. What's your name? Where are you from? Do you know what you've done today? Wu Lian had to treat this celestial being with caution. Therefore, once the man got on the bus, the operation personnel handcuffed him with special stainless steel handcuffs. My Taoist name is Yujing. Since I was born in Wuxia, then I'm from Wuxia. Is that how you answer? Speak human language. The investigator was very dissatisfied with the middle-aged man's attitude, so he pretended to be fierce and slammed the table. Seeing this, the middle-aged man was not offended at all. Instead, he chuckled and said, "Looking at your arrangements today, it seems like you're afraid that I'll do something evil here? You gathered people to spread religion and tried to mislead people. Isn't that evil? Is that so?" Hearing this, the middle-aged man who called himself Yujing suddenly shook his head and laughed. "I'm just following the will of the heavens. I don't seek selfish desires. I'm only doing this for the common people. Now that the golden age is coming, the ancient path is flourishing. Since the Wu Lian is the weapon of the country, how can we just block and expel them and forcefully cut off the path of cultivation? As the saying goes, it's better to lead than to block. What's the difference between such a forceful and foolish method and the tyranny of ancient times?" Hearing Yu Jingzi's words, the investigator was amused. "You know about the Wu Lian too? I almost thought that you've become stupid from cultivating in the mountains." There was no point in saying anything more. The middle-aged man was a proud man. Seeing the investigator's bad attitude, he shook his head lightly, closed his eyes, and said nothing more. After all, he had done what he had to do. Even if the Wu Lian wanted to punish him, he would not have any complaints in his heart. A single spark could start a prairie fire. As the forerunner, he was the first to light this fire. Now, it was time to see when this fire would burn. Chapter 5:31. Inside the courtyard. After listening to the conversation between Yu Jingzi and the investigator, Chen Shi silently retracted his divine sense. He finally understood everything and the cause of today's farce. Yu Jingzi. This person's cultivation was not high, but his ambition was very great. Just like Prometheus in Western mythology, Yu Jingzi did not do this for fame or profit. He was willing to take the risk of angering the Wu Lian and forcibly sprinkle a seed of fire in this world for the sake of his ideals. This Tao fire, it was the flame of inheritance that had been extinguished for a long time. Since the first appearance of the heaven and earth anomaly, the heaven and earth spirit Qi on earth had been recovering for nearly 2 years. 2 years, to Chen Shi, was just a snap of the fingers. In addition, he was a fat otaku who never left the house. so he naturally did not pay too much attention to the many subtle changes in the outside world. So what if it was recovering? At his level, the spirit chi was no longer the only condition to improve one's cultivation. Therefore, after the initial shock and excitement, Xianxia completely threw this matter to the back of his mind. Time flew by. Nian was already 7 years old. As long as 2 to 3 years had passed, many incomplete inheritances left behind from ancient times gradually flourished. What Yu Jingzi recited under the city tower today was an incomplete cultivation manual from ancient times. To Xianxia, this cultivation method was so simple that it was almost crude. However, to ordinary people who had never come into contact with cultivation methods, this cultivation method was comparable to a priceless treasure. There were always geniuses in the world who were far superior to ordinary people. They only needed to cultivate step by step according to the cultivation method, and they might really be able to successfully step into the Immortal sect. Qi refinement was just the beginning. However, this simple step seemed to be separated by mountains and seas and a natural moat. Take a step back and be mortal. Take a step forward and you will become an immortal. The difference between immortal and mortal was ultimately just a step. The ancestor once said, Confucians use literature to break the law, while chivalrous people use martial arts to break the law. With the recovery of spirit chi and the gradual rise of inheritances, the existing social order on Earth would definitely be severely impacted. Not to mention, the threat that the cultivators posed was far greater than that of ordinary firearms. Once they succeeded in their cultivation, they would be able to overturn mountains and seas and pluck stars and moons with just a wave of their hands. They would be like human-shaped nuclear bombs walking on the streets. And when cultivators possessed such strength, who could guarantee that? Could they be like Xianxia, who stayed at home all day, taking care of their children and playing with their cats? One person could destroy a city. One person was enough to overturn a country. Although the world is big, I am the law. Where could they not go? Who did they not dare to kill? Therefore, 2 years ago, Wu Lian confirmed that the spiritual qi of heaven and earth was beginning to recover, and that the ancient legacies were beginning to show signs of emerging. Together with the military, they came up with the first 5-year plan. Within 5 years, Wu Lian would do everything in his power to cultivate as many cultivators as possible who were loyal to the motherland. These cultivators, who were personally trained by Wu Lian, were one of the important pillars that Wu Lian would rely on to maintain the security of Wuxia in the future. In addition, Wu Lian strengthened their control over the cultivation world. For the cultivation legacies that had existed long before the spiritual qi recovery, Wu Lian mainly used coercion and enticement. While promising them all kinds of benefits, they also threatened them with nuclear bombs. Either they joined the Wu Lian, or they waited for the nuclear bomb to be leveled. There was no room for negotiation. Otherwise, as time went on, once an existence that even nuclear weapons could not destroy appeared, Wu Lian would have to pay more than 100 times the price if they wanted to restrain these people. Using thunderous means to show the kindness of a bodhisattva. The Wu Lian was a powerful weapon of the country, not a dictatorial force. Since they could obtain all kinds of benefits out of thin air if they joined, even the most noble cultivator would think twice before refusing. Moreover, even a 1,000-year-old turtle like Jiang Yan was willing to join. In fact, it already showed that joining the Wu Lian was definitely a very wise decision. Therefore, after the first 5-year plan was proposed, Wu Lian successfully gathered most of the cultivation legacies in Wuxia. The plan went smoothly. In fact, as long as the first 5-year plan was successfully achieved, Wu Lian would consider opening the cultivation legacies to the public and take the initiative to take responsibility for promoting the development of the cultivation world. But it was a pity, not everyone could think from the perspective of the country. Therefore, no matter how good Wu Lian's plan was, it could not win everyone's approval. When the forest was big, there were naturally all kinds of birds. Perhaps these cultivators did not recognize their national identity from the beginning to the end. Although they were born and raised in Wuxia, they did not have the concept of a country in their hearts, so they could not understand the Wu Lian's actions. In ancient times, there was no Wu Lian, but everyone cultivated well. How come after the Wu Lian, ordinary people could not cultivate? Therefore, in the second year of the spiritual qi recovery, pioneers like Yu Jingzi, who had great ambitions and cared about the common people, stepped forward one after another. They believed that cultivation should be free and unrestrained, so they could not accept the Wu Lian's unified management model. What kind of *T country was this? Cultivation was one's own business. What did it have to do with the country? Since the Wu Lian wanted to suppress the cultivation legacies and prevent ordinary people from cultivating, these pioneers should bravely step forward and spread the cultivation fire seed for the world. A single spark could also start a prairie fire. Yu Jingzi was not the first, and presumably would not be the last. But unlike other people who secretly preached, Yu Jingzi's thoughts were more extreme, and his style of doing things was more daring. How developed was the internet these days? As long as there was a farce, it would spread throughout the country almost instantly. Preaching under Tiananmen Square. Today's incident was so big that even the Wu Lian could not block and delete the related videos and audio immediately. Of course, after ordinary people saw it, they might just chuckle, click like, and then scroll down to watch another video. This was what most people did, but it was definitely not what everyone did. As long as 1 in 1,000 people was willing to carefully study what Yu Jingzi was talking about, then he would definitely be able to benefit from it. Since the fire seed had been thrown, the next step was to see when it could start a prairie fire. The world is going to change. In the courtyard, Xianxia silently sighed. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he quickly got up and took out a laptop from his room. Don't forget, long before becoming an immortal cultivator, Xianxia was also a diligent programmer, and the kind with excellent professional skills. Yo, it's been deleted so quickly? Xianxia took the laptop and did a simple search. He found that the news about today's farce had been mostly deleted by the Wu Lian, leaving only some 404 pages that had not been updated in time. Therefore, he decisively used his specialty. After a series of fierce operations, he opened a slightly strange website on the laptop. Yu Jingzi, oh, it's here. The update of the information is quite timely, so this is the limit of this cultivation technique. Then what should I do after I reach foundation establishment? This kind of trash can be sold for 5 million. Are you kidding me? Kavenka cried. I'm so sorry, I really don't want to stop updating. Chapter 5:32. The web page Xianxia was browsing at this moment was not a web page that could be accessed by ordinary people. This was the legendary dark web. Since Wu Lian had blocked related events, Xianxia wanted to go to the dark web to see if there was any top-secret information that was not known to the public. Of course, he had to enjoy it to his heart's content. The result was just as Xianxia expected. Since the beginning of the recovery of spirit qi, countries around the world had taken corresponding actions. It was just that when it came to the management of the cultivation world, the control that capitalist countries had was far less than a socialist country like Wuxia. Therefore, many Western countries, especially traditional countries with a long history like England and France, had already established many large-scale cultivation organizations. Cultivation also meant extraordinary ability. For anyone, it was simply an irresistible temptation. As a result, in these short 2 years, the foreign cultivator organizations developed like a virus. Among them, the Knights Templar and the Wizard Association were the most famous. The website Xianxia was browsing at this moment, Solomon, was the world's largest dark web built and operated by the Knights Templar. In addition to conventional firearms and opium transactions, one could also buy all kinds of unconventional goods, such as beautiful women, slaves, human heads, and even military aircraft, tanks, and cannons that could not be obtained through conventional channels could all be bought here. Of course, the premise was that one had enough money. In addition to these things, the most eye-catching one was naturally the cultivation method. This was also a special product that had only appeared in the past 2 years. Perhaps Yu Jingzi had lost his mind after secluding himself in the mountains and did not know how to use modern technology flexibly. Therefore, when he had just finished teaching under Tiananmen City, The dark web had already listed the cultivation methods he had imparted. 5 million per copy, unlimited. In other words, as long as one person chose to pay, the Knights Templar could pick up 5 million for free. If 1,000 people bought, the Knights Templar could pick up 5 billion for free. What kind of concept was this? It was no wonder that Xianxia was surprised. After all, cultivation methods were written on paper, and how much did a piece of paper cost? Although his foundation cultivation pill was also very expensive, he still spent some money on it. Xianxia not only had to purchase the raw materials, but he also had to process them himself. Thinking about it this way, it seemed that selling cultivation techniques was more cost-effective. The dark web was not Taobao. Naturally, there was no detailed sales data on it. Therefore, Xianxia did not know how many copies of this cultivation method had been sold. However, Xianxia speculated that this set of cultivation methods should not be able to sell many copies. Because it was incomplete, if he cultivated according to this cultivation method, he could only reach the peak of the qi refining stage at most. He was still thousands of miles away from the foundation establishment stage. However, what Xianxia did not expect was, up until now, the number of people who had bought this cultivation method had far exceeded the range he could imagine. Xianxia underestimated the attractiveness of cultivation methods to ordinary people. At the same time, he also underestimated the desire of foreigners for the inheritance of Wuxia. If it were not for the Wu Yan holding the fort outside, almost turning Wuxia into an iron bucket, there would have been assassins rushing into Wuxia with large-caliber sniper rifles to search for the ancient inheritance in the famous mountains and rivers. In this world, there were too few ancient inheritances as strong as Daiyu Island. More of them were individual cultivators like Yu Jingzi. Was the foundation establishment stage weak? That was equivalent to Xianxia's point of view. For ordinary people, the foundation establishment stage was second only to the celestial beings. Even according to Wu Lian's strength evaluation standards, the foundation establishment stage was at least an A-level expert. What did this mean? A mere incomplete cultivation method could make an ordinary person become an A-level expert. Now, it was only selling for 5 million. Was it too expensive? Of course it was not. Therefore, when the farce of Yu Jingzi preaching in front of Tiananmen Square broke out, the whole world was in an uproar. It had to be said that the Wu Lian had really put in a lot of effort to maintain the security of Wuxia. No wonder there had been less and less news coming from abroad in recent years. It turned out that the Wu Lian had blocked all of it in advance. Even so, if the situation continued to develop at this rate, it wouldn't be long before Wuxia would once again bring out the policy of seclusion until the Wu Alliance completed the first 5-year plan. Other than trading, the most practical function of the dark web was intelligence and information exchange. This was the world's largest cultivator forum and also the world's largest news website. Xianxia browsed through the news channel and found that it was all about cultivators. For example, a knight commander of the Knights Templar had a fight with a Brahmin boss some time ago. Or, a high-ranking member of Yinyang Liao had a fight with a white-robed wizard of the Sorcerers Association. If the two sides fought in public, the website would even list the actual combat videos. This is interesting. I wonder if my name is on it? Let's search. Xianxia seemed to have opened the door to a new world. He did not do anything for the whole day. He just sat in the courtyard with his computer and browsed the website while drinking tea. Unlike official websites, searching for content on the dark web cost money. It cost a few hundred yuan each time. Therefore, Xianxia spent a lot of effort and finally got past the surveillance of the Wuxia Internet Police and successfully tied his bank card to the dark web. As the notifications of successful purchases kept ringing, Xianxia found several pieces of information about him in a short while. Oh, there's really something? Mr. Chen, real name unknown, age unknown, from Wuxia, strength evaluation X, third on the heaven leaderboard, main experience, defeated the leader of the Dark Ghost sect, Su Feng, at the peak of Taihang Mountain in Wuxia. Compared to Xianxia's other achievements, the battle with Su Feng at Taihang Mountain was too eye-catching. Therefore, it was not surprising that it was recorded by the dark web. Other than that, Xianxia also found several pieces of information about himself. However, the sources of these pieces of information did not seem to be reliable. Therefore, the dark web labeled them as unconfirmed. Third on the Heaven leaderboard? Xianxia noticed this so-called ranking. Therefore, he tried to click on the two words, Heaven leaderboard. He did not expect a window to pop up on the webpage. I have to pay for this? They must be crazy poor. After silently ridiculing him, Xianxia obediently handed over the money. Then he saw a detailed list made by the Knights Templar after a few rounds of review. Chapter 5:33. Just like the status of the Forbes list in people's hearts, this strength list created by the Knights Templar had been unanimously recognized by almost all cultivators in the world since the moment it was released. Therefore, this list was also known as the Heaven List. The list recorded almost all the cultivators who had shown their prowess in various parts of the world. As long as a cultivator had fought in public, the Knights Templar would use this cultivator's battle record and cultivation base, as well as the evaluation of some more authoritative organizations such as the Wu Lian and Yinyang Liao. Finally, this cultivator would be listed on the Heaven List in order of strength. Just like the Forbes list, the Heaven List only had 500 names. Therefore, being listed on the Heaven List was the highest honor in the hearts of almost all cultivators. Xianxia was also on the list, and he was ranked in the top 3. Unlike the free information he had seen before, the information Xianxia saw after he paid for it was more complete. Almost every name was followed by a few hundred or even a few thousand words of detailed information. Mr. Chen, real name unknown, age unknown, from Wuxia, strength evaluation X, ranked 3rd on the Heaven List. In addition to this free information, the notes column attached to the Heaven List actually clearly recorded the reason why Xianxia was able to sit in the top 3. Apart from the battle with Su Feng, Mr. Chen has not fought with anyone in public, so there is no way to know his specific cultivation base. According to reliable information obtained from within the Wu Lian, Mr. Chen should be recognized as the strongest person within the Wu Lian. There are even rumors that say that even Lin Tingfeng, who is currently ranked 1st on the Heaven List, does not seem to have the confidence to beat Mr. Chen. Therefore, the Knights Templar combined all the information they currently have and made an exception to list Mr. Chen as the 3rd on the Heaven List. If there are any objections, you can go to Wuxia to find Mr. Chen and fight him. The Knights Templar are willing to follow you all the way and take the initiative to be the witnesses. Seeing this, Xianxia could not help but shake his head and laugh. Why did they make it the same as by Xiaoxing's Jianghu weapon manual? If they did this, wouldn't that be encouraging the cultivators to fight crazily for a false reputation? Xianxia didn't really care about his ranking. After he roughly browsed through the list, he found that this list wasn't very reliable. It was even a little too one-sided. Perhaps it was because the Wu Lian had blocked all relevant information, so even though Daiyu Island had joined the Wu Lian, there was no one with the surname Jiang on the Heaven roll. If the Heaven leaderboard was really as authoritative as imagined, how could there not be anyone with the surname Jiang on it? Even if Xianxia was not included, Jiang Yan should still be number 1 on the Heaven leaderboard. How could an ordinary person compare to an old tortoise that had lived for over 1,000 years? Thus, it was fine to just take a look at this list, but one must not take it seriously. Lin Tingfeng? 1st on the Heaven leaderboard? Although Xianxia didn't really care about this list, he still subconsciously clicked on the detailed introduction of the number 1 on the Heaven leaderboard. It was just like how everyone knew that the world's highest peak was Mount Everest, but very few people knew that the world's 2nd highest peak was Chogori Peak. This was human nature, and Xianxia was no exception. Therefore, the number 1 on the Heaven leaderboard was really quite eye-catching. As the current number 1 on the Heaven leaderboard, Lin Tingfeng was not only one of the founders of the Wu Lian, but also one of the 3 divine pillars of Wuxia. The so-called 3 divine pillars were actually the 3 giants of the Wu Lian. One had to know that long before Xianxia returned to Earth, the 3 divine pillars were already famous all over the world. If the 3 divine pillars could forcefully cultivate to the heavenly man level when spirit chi was exhausted, one could imagine how outstanding their talents were. Now that spirit qi had begun to recover, there might not be many changes in a short period of time. However, as time passed, the most outstanding among them would naturally be able to stand out from the vast masses. At this point, it was necessary to mention a classic biological term, which was catch-up growth. At the same time, it was also known as compensatory growth. If Xianxia guessed correctly, Earth should be in the catch-up stage now. After all, how powerful was Earth in ancient times? Because of the exhaustion of spirit qi, Earth had completely become what people called the Tianshu ruins. Therefore, once spirit qi on Earth began to recover, it would inevitably lead to an almost abnormal increase in the strength of cultivators. At present, the powerhouses on the Heaven leaderboard were mainly concentrated in the Heavenly Man level, which was the level above the Foundation establishment level and below the Golden Core level. If things continued to develop according to the current momentum, within 10 years, there should be someone who could take the lead in breaking through the Golden Core level and officially step into the Yuaning stage. Yuaning? What kind of concept was that? At that time, the Earth should also show a different appearance, right? Xianxia stood from the perspective of a bystander and roughly deduced the changes of Earth's future. Then he suddenly thought of a very serious problem. 10 years later, Earth would no longer be the stage for him, the great Supreme Qin. It would be Nianyan's turn to shine. At the age of 17 or 18, wasn't it the best time for Nianyan to be in her prime and full of vigor? When he thought that Nianyan might face a new golden age in the future, Xianxia couldn't help but feel happy for his daughter from the bottom of his heart. At least, she didn't have to be like her father, who had to wander around for most of his life and go through untold hardships before finally finding the goal that he had been pursuing all his life. Wasn't that right? People often said that after having children, they would understand how difficult it was to be a parent. Family was always an endless topic, but parents were still the ones who contributed the most and received the least in return. Flowers could bloom again, but there was no youth in life. In the blink of an eye, time passed quickly. 2 years quietly slipped away just like that. Nianyan was 9 years old. During this time, she skipped another grade, from the 4th grade to the 5th grade. Therefore, not long after her 9th birthday, Nianyan officially ushered in her last summer vacation in elementary school. When school started again next time, she would be a 6th grade student. Did time pass quickly? Not at all. Because after having children, we will find that time becomes worthless at all. After sending the child to school in the morning, in the blink of an eye, we have to wait patiently at the school gate for the child to finish school. Every day, we have to care about the child's food and clothing as well as the child's mental health. In addition to accompanying the child to eat, play, and chat, we have to constantly urge the child to study hard. Just like the lyrics of the song, "The magic of love spins in circles, thinking of you makes my heart bloom, night and day." It was just that the song here was not about love, but about family. From the moment the child was born, the child officially became the axis of the entire family, so parents had to revolve around the child every day. Early in the morning, after Nianyan had breakfast, she imitated Xianxia and brought out a rocking chair from the house. Then, the father and daughter each held a large fan and lay in the chair leisurely fanning themselves. "Dad, you said, this time, if I get first place in the grade again, you will take me to ride a horse. When are we going?" Nianyan leaned on the chair and poked Xianxia with the fan. After that, a look of anticipation appeared on her face. Sure enough, Dad would never let her down, just as she would not let Dad down. "Okay, when do you want to go?" "I think the weather today is pretty good, how about today?" "But you have to go back to the room and change your clothes. Don't wear a skirt, it's inconvenient." Hearing this, Nianyan's eyes suddenly lit up. She quickly jumped off the chair excitedly, then grabbed Xianxia's hand and tried to pull him up from the chair. "Dad is so nice." Chapter 5:34. Presumably, every parent knew that their children changed their clothes very quickly. Although Nianyan had not yet entered puberty, her height was still steadily increasing at a rate of 5 centimeters per year. Just after her 9th birthday, Nian height had already reached 135 centimeters, so even if she skipped 2 grades, she was not considered too short in the 6th grade. Her height was growing very quickly, so naturally, she was wearing more and more clothes. Little brat? No, she should be called a little brat now. Perhaps she inherited her mother's aesthetic preference, so Nian was now more and more fond of wearing plain colors and simpler styles. Those colorful princess dresses had actually disappeared from her wardrobe for a long time. Qin Ruing's face shape leaned towards an oval face. Since Nian inherited all of her mother's advantages, now that she was 9 years old, her face naturally lost some of the baby fat that was unique to children. Instead, she had a trace of a young girl's bright appearance. She was wearing a pure white dress with a simple ponytail on her head, coupled with her big bright eyes and the smile that was always on her face. If she put on some light makeup, she could simply be a Taobao children's clothing model. Hello, children's clothing model? But then again, it didn't seem like a good thing for a girl to be too beautiful. For example, Xianxia's mood was very complicated now. From the perspective of a father, Xianxia naturally hoped that his daughter was as beautiful as possible. But when his daughter really grew up, there would be passers-by who couldn't help but pick up their phones to secretly take pictures every day. Xianxia's mood became heavier and heavier. The cabbage at home was becoming more and more beautiful. What should he do in the future? In a blink of an eye, he was surrounded by little pigs waiting to be fed. He almost wanted to rush into his vegetable garden and eat this cabbage on the spot. Nian was only 9 years old. How could a 9-year-old child not look good? Don't you know that a girl changes 18 times between childhood and womanhood? He didn't even let go of such a young child. What a beast! When Nian really entered puberty and the secondary sexual characteristics appeared, Xianxia's worries would be a few hundred times greater than now. Compared to when she was 7 years old, Nian's mind was becoming more active, and her ability to express herself was also becoming stronger. Therefore, she was now speaking one sentence after another. She truly had the temperament of a leader. In school, she was the class monitor, a good student, and also the leader of the young pioneers. Different from many of the children of officials, these honors were fought for by her own performance, so not only was Nian famous in class, but she was also somewhat famous in school. If it wasn't for her young age, some precocious child would have made her the school belle. She was already a combination of wisdom and beauty, and if she added her omnipotent father into the mix, with such excellent conditions, it was unknown if there was anyone in this world who was worthy of her. So don't look at how Xianxia was worried that his daughter was too popular. Maybe in another 20 years, he, as a father, would have to personally travel thousands of miles in the divine continent just to find a good partner for his daughter. Today's entertainment was horse riding. It wasn't the kind of wild horses that galloped recklessly on the prairie, but professional horse racing in the International Equestrian School. So, after Xianxia let Nian go back to the room to change her clothes, the father and daughter were ready to set off. Here was something that needed to be mentioned. After 2 years of hard work, Qin Ruing's cultivation had finally reached the peak of the celestial being realm. Currently, she was at the stage where she could break through at any time. So, during this period of time, Qin Ruing didn't attend the family gatherings. Instead, like Qin Xueqing and Qin Yongwang, she shut herself in her room all day long. This was the daily life of a cultivator. Other than cultivation, there was only cultivation. Unless she reached Xianxia's realm, she still had a long way to go before she could go into seclusion. Nian seemed to have gotten used to Qin Ruing's recent seclusion. So, after shouting from outside the door, she skipped to Xianxia's side. Then, she held onto Xianxia's arm and directly walked out of the courtyard. "Dad, didn't you buy 4 lessons for me last time? I still have 2 lessons to attend. How about we come back later today and attend the remaining 2 lessons together?" "Okay, then we can only eat outside today. Later on, you can't be picky about your food." As he spoke, Xianxia smiled and pinched her face. This child's mouth had already been spoiled by him. Now, she basically didn't eat outside food, so he had to give her a heads up in advance. "Okay, I'm not picky about my food." Perhaps it was because she had ridden a big cat when she was young. Ever since Xianxia took her to the racetrack, This little girl was completely infatuated with riding horses. Unfortunately, the land in Shangjing was too expensive. It was impossible to open a racetrack in the core city. So, no matter how much she liked it, Xianxia couldn't take her to ride horses every day. The father and daughter chatted and laughed as they walked out of the gate of drooping flowers in large strides. But at this moment, all of a sudden, a strong demonic wind blew in the courtyard. It was clearly a bright and sunny morning, but the demonic wind in the courtyard was blowing so loudly that Nian couldn't open her eyes. "Dad, is it going to rain?" The little girl seemed to be frightened by the sudden demonic wind. So, she hurriedly burrowed into Xianxia's arms. Seeing this, Xianxia thoughtfully looked back at the courtyard. Then, he raised his left hand and lightly waved it. Following his wave, the heaven and earth suddenly quieted down. The wind stopped. Everything returned to normal. "Nian, wait for me here. It might rain. I'll go back and get an umbrella." Nian didn't suspect anything. After nodding her head honestly, she obediently stood under the eaves and waited for Xianxia to go get an umbrella. Xianxia smiled and patted her head. Then, he turned and walked into the courtyard. Then, a familiar figure appeared in front of Xianxia again. "Oh, you broke through? Congratulations." Like Qin Ruiying, Qin Xueqing had been in seclusion during this time. Her sister-in-law's talent was excellent. In addition, she had a certain foundation in martial arts. So, in just a few years, she completed the transformation from foundation establishment to golden core. The demonic wind just now was a fluctuation of vital energy that she accidentally set off when she came out of seclusion. After not seeing her for 2 years, her sister-in-law was still elegant. So, when she saw Xianxia, the smile on her face suddenly turned cold. "It's been 2 years. You lied to me in seclusion just to delay for 2 more years?" Chapter 5:35. The atmosphere in the courtyard was a little awkward. In the face of Qin Xueqing's sudden accusation, Xianxia was stunned for a moment. Then, he pretended to be surprised and asked, "What did I lie to you about?" After hearing Xianxia's self-righteous question, Qin Xueqing became even angrier. She frowned and opened her mouth slightly as if she wanted to say something, but Xianxia didn't give her the chance. Before she could open her mouth again, Xianxia's side was like a string of cannons. Her mouth kept rattling. "Say, we are relatives now. Can you not measure the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain? Didn't you practice the great wilderness physical exercise technique well? Why don't you recognize me now? Look at you now. Ice skin, jade bones, and jade body are at the initial stage. You can block the attack of an ordinary Dharma treasure with just your physical body. What else are you not satisfied with? If you're still not satisfied, you can continue to practice. When you practice this technique to the highest level, you might be able to shatter the void with your physical body and step into the void realm in a whole new way." Looking at Xianxia's serious expression, those who didn't know would think that Qin Xueqing really took advantage of him. In fact, wasn't this cultivation method the same one he had given to the big cat before? What needed to be mentioned here was, whether it was Tianshu, Tianxian, or Taiwei enclosure, the cultivation system in these places was mainly qi refinement. It was the most orthodox cultivation system known to immortal cultivators, which was the immortal cultivation method. However, with Xianxia's current experience, although the orthodox cultivation system was complete and strong, it didn't mean that other cultivation systems were necessarily weak. They were even regarded as wrong paths by others. For example, the martial arts that Qin Xueqing was learning now, or the magic and witchcraft on Earth, or even the deformed children that evolved from necromancers like the Onmyoji. The end of the qi refinement method was the immortal emperor. Then, what was the end of the body refinement method? The reason why people couldn't see the end was because they hadn't found the path to the end. Cultivation methods were dead, but people were alive. The universe was vast and boundless. Who could be sure that the other cultivation holy lands would focus on qi refinement? Therefore, in the end, it was still the same old saying, the great Tao flowed like mercury, and every grain was round. Therefore, Xianxia never asked about his sister-in-law's cultivation method. Since she liked to practice like this, then he would let her practice on her own. As her brother-in-law, the most he could do was give her some help from the side. For example, he could provide her with the Great Desolation body tempering technique and use it as inspiration. Perhaps it was because the big cat was a monster, so even after cultivating for so long, it was still stuck at the initial stage. On the other hand, after Qin Xueqing obtained the Great Desolation body forging technique, she was able to completely complete the first stage of transformation within a short span of 2 years. From then on, she became a true body cultivator. The Great Desolation body forging technique was found by Qin Shi in the Sky Yen Divine Sects library. This was an incomplete body tempering technique, so Qin Shi didn't want to give this technique to Qin Xueqing. The reason why he changed his mind and took the initiative to pass this technique to Qin Xueqing was mainly because Chonghua and Yiji. These two brats didn't keep their promises. They used their mother's birthday as an excuse to gain sympathy. They said that they would be back in 7 days, but in the end, it had been 2 years. They hadn't returned for 2 whole years. Great Sovereign Qin didn't even have enough time to make his children happy, so how could he really run to the Supreme Palace enclosure to catch them? As the saying goes, revenge is a dish best served cold. Qin Shi wasn't anxious at all, but his sister-in-law couldn't sit still anymore. They said that it would be 7 days, but it was delayed again and again. 1 month wasn't enough, so they waited for another 2 months. 2 months had passed, but Chonghua and Yiji still didn't show any signs of showing up. His sister-in-law couldn't wait any longer, so she kept saying that she wanted to go to the Supreme Palace enclosure and that she had to personally catch those 2 brats. How could Qin Shi agree to her going to the Supreme Palace enclosure when he saw her being so impatient? What if she was captured by the Xinyuan family or Jade Clear Paradise before they were caught? At that time, wouldn't Great Sovereign Qin have to personally make a trip? Qin Shi obviously wouldn't do this kind of loss-making business. So he used the Great Desolation body forging technique as bait, and after some careful guidance, he successfully lured his sister-in-law into a death seclusion. This time, his ears were finally clear. Qin Shi originally planned to wait until Nian came of age, then bring his family to the Supreme Palace enclosure for a tour, and then catch those 2 brats. Who would have thought that Qin Xueqing's talent was actually so outstanding? In a short 2 years' time, she had successfully mastered the Great Desolation body forging technique. Although it was only the first stage, but to Qin Xueqing, this was a brand new beginning. Now that Qin Xueqing had come out of seclusion, it actually meant that Qin Shi must give her a satisfactory explanation today. Either he went or she went. Anyway, one of them had to go. This was his sister-in-law's character. If there's something to say, say it. If there's nothing to say, don't find trouble. Since Chonghua and Yiji said that they would come back, then they must come back. Qin Xueqing could forgive their previous mistakes, but she absolutely couldn't tolerate being played and fooled like this. Hence, no matter what Qin Shi said now, his sister-in-law only looked at him coldly. Qin Shi was stunned by her stare, and in the end he really didn't know what to say, so he spread his hands and asked helplessly, "Say it, what exactly do you want?" "Lend me a Xing Cha, I'll go by myself." His sister-in-law was rather straightforward. She didn't want to listen to Qin Shi's excuses anymore, and didn't want to waste any more time, so the best way was for her to personally make a trip to the Supreme Palace enclosure. Qin Shi had long expected that she would say this. Hence, after seriously sizing up Qin Xueqing, he kept the smile on his face and asked seriously, "Have you thought it through? That place isn't Earth. Once you meet with any danger, even I won't be able to rush over to save you immediately." Not sure if it was because Qin Shi had long regarded Qin Xueqing as his family, so he really didn't want Qin Xueqing to go to the Supreme Palace enclosure alone. It was a very strange feeling. Just like when Nian suddenly said that she wanted to go out to play alone, how could Qin Shi, as her father, be at ease? But what could he do even if he was worried? How could Qin Shi not know his sister-in-law's character? "I've thought it through. This trip is not only to seek revenge, but also to go out and travel. Although I'm not as strong as you, I'm not a lamb to be slaughtered by others. It's fine if I didn't know about the Supreme Palace enclosure before, but now that I know, how can I continue to live under this blue sky? The universe is so big, I also want to see it. Speaking of this, Qin Shueqing suddenly paused, and then looked up at the blue sky above her head with a yearning expression. It was still that beautiful blue sky and white clouds, but her line of sight seemed to have penetrated the clouds, crossed the boundless void, and reached the other end of the universe. That's right. With her strong character, how could she not yearn for the colorful depths of the universe? And this was obviously her sister-in-law's true thoughts deep in her heart. Don't worry, I know you're doing this for my own good. Chapter 5:36. I know you are doing this for my own good. Maybe it was the reluctance to part, so Qin Shueqing's face showed a gentle and sweet smile for the first time. She stood in the middle of the yard, but Yingying's smile gave people a warm feeling like the winter snow had melted and spring had returned. Seeing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but show an expression like he had seen a ghost. After Qin Shueqing saw his expression, she seemed to suddenly think of something, and a blush suddenly flew on her face. I didn't expect this. The sister-in-law who had always considered herself a tigress actually showed such a shy little girl's attitude in private. Looking at her shy and charming face, people who didn't know would probably think that she had mistakenly eaten some kind of indescribable medicine. With Chen Shi's understanding of Qin Shueqing, if the atmosphere continued to be awkward at this time, this girl might turn hostile on the spot. Therefore, Chen Shi didn't say anything more. After a light cough, he took out something from his arms and handed it to Qin Shueqing. This was Chenghua's summer mustard seed bag, but it was already his. In addition to a Xianxia that was improved by Qin Shi, there were also the spirit stones left by Yi Ji, as well as some defensive magic weapons and medicinal materials. For Qin Shi, these things were not valuable at all, and they were not even as practical as yuan. But for Qin Shueqing, these things were like the novice equipment that came with the system, and they were also necessary for her to enter the martial arts world. The imprint of these things has been erased by me. As long as you drip a drop of blood on them, you can use them freely. The journey to the Supreme Palace enclosure is long. Once you encounter any danger, even I can't come to save you immediately, so you have to remember that you must be careful on this trip. When I went to the Supreme Palace enclosure earlier, I'd made a few friends there. If you really encounter any danger, then it's best that you don't try to be brave and directly report my name. Perhaps you'll be able to scare them. By the way, aren't the first and second on the Heaven Leaderboard members from Wu Lian? Why don't you bring them with you? Isn't it better to have more people to take care of one another? Chen Shi was like a parent who was about to send his child off to a faraway journey. After Qin Wanqing heard this, she didn't interrupt him coldly. Instead, she stood silently to the side and listened carefully to every word Qin Shi said. I have a jade pendant here. Take it as well. Remember to wear it on your body. This thing was originally prepared for Nian Nian, but she can't use it for the time being. Since you're going so far away, I'll give it to you to protect yourself first, but you must remember, this jade pendant can only be used 3 times. After 3 times, it will completely lose its effect. So when you encounter danger, you must escape as soon as possible. As he spoke, Qin Shi took out a unique jade pendant from his bosom. It was no wonder that Qin Shi was so long-winded today. After all, he knew Qin Shueqing's character too well. If he didn't repeatedly emphasize in advance, with her previous behavior, she definitely wouldn't care whether the person standing opposite her was a celestial venerable or a supreme venerable. In short, she would just bite the bullet and do it. It had to be said that for this stubborn sister-in-law of his, Qin Shi's, stubbornness really broke his heart. In the end, Qin Shueqing still left. Other than Qin Shi, no one knew that she flew into outer space alone just like that. Nian Nian didn't know what her father and aunt were talking about in the courtyard. She was focused on the racecourse, so when Qin Shi finally crossed the Chuehua gate with an umbrella, the little girl hurriedly pulled Qin Shi and was about to leave. After being delayed by Qin Shueqing, it was already 10 o'clock in the morning. The racecourse was outside the 4th Ring Road. Even if there was no traffic, it would take nearly an hour to run. So Xianxia didn't take the bus with Nian. Instead, he took out his phone and called for a Didi taxi. The father and daughter stood by the roadside, bored to death, waiting for a taxi. At this time, a girl with a lot of flyers in her hand suddenly came to them. "Hello sir, your daughter is so cute. I wonder if you have signed her up for a martial arts training class?" Hearing this, Xianxia turned his head and looked at the girl. She was about 18 or 19 years old. She should be a part-time college student. "Sorry, she's not interested in these." Xianxia politely refused. However, the girl saw that Nian didn't participate in any martial arts training class, so she mustered up the courage and continued to introduce to Xianxia, "Sir, it's like this. Our martial arts training class has just opened and is currently holding a membership top-up event. Your daughter should still be in elementary school, right? Her age is a good time to learn martial arts. Do you want to know more about it? Our martial arts training class has a strong teaching staff. The head coach has won a national competition. If you send your daughter to our class, she will definitely become a qualified martial artist in the future. Sorry, we're really not interested." "Oh, okay, sorry to bother you," the girl left with a disappointed face. From beginning to end, Nian didn't say a word because she was already used to it. Just like the popular swimming and fitness 2 years ago, for some reason, there was a sudden martial arts craze in the country in the past 2 years. With the slogan of strengthening the body and retaining one's youth, this martial arts craze was extremely fierce. Whether it was a small city or a big city like Xianxia, there was a martial arts training class near every residential area. The low-end ones were called martial arts training classes, and the high-end ones were called martial arts halls. The number was almost comparable to internet cafes. Speaking of this, I have to first mention a past event that people born in the 90s and the aughts might not know much about. In the 1980s, there was a Qigong craze in the country. From military commanders, national defense experts, and academicians of the Chinese Academy of Sciences to ignorant old people and young children, almost everyone was learning Qigong and believed in it without a doubt. Speaking of which, this wasn't a shameful thing. Because when Qigong was popular in Wuxia, the theory of telepathy was also popular in Western countries. At that time, there was no 4G network, and there were no Weibo videos. Therefore, only people who experienced it personally knew how exaggerated the Qigong craze was. In the blink of an eye, 40 years had passed. Society was constantly developing, and humans were constantly improving. Looking back, some people might think that people in the past were too stupid and ignorant. How could they believe in something as unreliable as Qigong? If people had such doubts, it meant that they didn't know. The eye exercise was actually a product of the Qigong craze, and it had been passed down to this day. And the original name of this famous set of eye health exercises was Clear Eye Qigong Exercise. Chapter 537. The return of Immortal Cultivation as a stay-at-home dad was delayed by something today. Please wait for a moment. After the content is updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 538. Throughout human history, whenever a particular trend arose at a particular time, this trend would inevitably sweep across the entire country in a very short period of time. Therefore, under the influence of the Wu Lian in secret, coupled with the support of the mainstream media, Wuxia immediately set off a huge wave of martial arts practice. Under the banner of strengthening the body, retaining youth, and lightening the body, countless martial arts training classes sprung up like bamboo shoots after a spring rain and gradually replaced the extremely popular gyms from 2 years ago. Martial arts and dancing were different. It not only had the effect of exercising the body, but also had the effect of self-defense. Therefore, as soon as the martial arts trend arose, many delicate little girls took the lead and became the main students in the martial arts halls. Moreover, unlike the Qigong craze 40 years ago, the Wu Lian brought out something really useful this time. What needed to be understood here was, martial arts had training methods and fighting methods. Training methods were often said to be flowery and impractical, But fighting methods were the real application of actual combat. The Arhat fist that was widely circulated in society today was no longer a training method, but a real fighting method. Therefore, after ordinary people learned it, they could also fight to a certain extent. It was very obvious that this Arhat fist came from the Wulian. As the public's recognition of martial arts increased, the Wulian once again stepped out from behind the scenes and became the Chinese Martial Arts Research Association that people now saw. Internally, the Wulian worked together with various levels of government to promote martial arts throughout the country. Externally, Wuxia's officials also specially introduced a trial law regarding martial artists, the Provisional Regulations of the Chinese Martial Arts Management Association. In the provisional regulations, fighting was still illegal, but if it was in a formal martial arts hall registered with the Industry and Commerce Bureau, it would be regarded as a legitimate martial arts competition. As long as it did not result in death or disability, it was not illegal. What kind of exaggerated promotion was this? It was almost equivalent to the chairman personally promoting martial arts. Therefore, after the trial law was released, countless speculators heard the news and moved in. In a short period of time, regardless of whether there were real martial artists in charge, martial arts training classes of all sizes vied to open and settle down, looking as if they would reproduce Yuan style. These days, children would always be led by their parents into various interest training classes. In terms of interests and hobbies, the little girl didn't seem to inherit Qin Ruing's quiet elegance. Instead, she inherited Qin Xueqing's liveliness and energy. After Qin, she took her to experience riding a horse. The little girl was completely infatuated with horsemanship. As a standard in Western aristocratic schools, equestrian skills might be slightly different from what ordinary people imagined. It was the only event in the Olympic Games where men and women competed on the same field, so many children from rich families abroad began to learn horsemanship when they were young. Just like a European proverb says, those who can ride horses are not necessarily nobles, but nobles certainly can ride horses. As more and more Wuxia people went to study in British aristocratic schools, this trend naturally spread to Wuxia as well. Nobles, of course, had to be particular. A helmet, gloves, riding boots, breeches, charbus, and a protective vest were all indispensable. It was as if without it, it could no longer be called an international equestrian skill, but a traditional equestrian sport in Wuxia. Therefore, when Nian just signed up, the staff of the equestrian club persuaded her to buy a set of equipment. Although Qin was not very interested in these things, because Nian wanted to learn, he paid the money quickly and bought 16 classes at one time. Since this thing was called an aristocratic sport, the charging standard naturally had to be according to the aristocratic standard. A 45-minute class cost 800 yuan, and the coach had to charge extra. But even so, when Xianxia came to the club with Nian, the race course was still crowded with children practicing. Although many of the children were just individual customers who bought in a group, but it should be known that children also had vanity. Therefore, after experiencing such high-end extracurricular training like horsemanship once, these children would usually be like Nian, clamoring for their parents to pay for the class. If the child liked it, then buy it. Although it was a little painful, it was not unbearable. In fact, the reason why many parents agreed to let their children learn horsemanship was that they actually had their own calculations in mind. Children from ordinary families certainly had no way to come into contact with children from rich families. In order to let their children come into contact with a higher social circle, the equestrian club was obviously a very good platform. After all, whether a family was rich or not, one only needed to look at the children's clothes to know. Children from ordinary families would definitely only wear the free clothes provided by the club. Only the truly wealthy families would buy their own equestrian outfits for their children. Nian's appearance was already outstanding, so when she changed into her equestrian clothes and came to the lounge to wait for the staff to arrange the horse, several parents could not help but whisper to each other. Children were not so calculative. As long as their children could have a good relationship with Nian, they, as parents, would naturally be able to talk to Xianxia. Judging from her appearance, Xianxia didn't look very old, and her dressing was very low-key. But where was this place? It was one of the best equestrian clubs in Shangjing. Therefore, the more low-key people like Xianxia acted, the more complicated their background was. As long as they could get in touch with Xianxia, they might be able to get some unexpected benefits from it. For example, they could take this opportunity to become Xianxia's agent and help Xianxia deal with some trivial matters that he could not personally deal with, or they could get some project approval from Xianxia that ordinary people could not get at all. In short, in the imagination of these parents, Xianxia had already become a powerful young master in Shangjing, and the kind that could get a redhead approval. Therefore, after a simple discussion, several parents from ordinary backgrounds told their children that they must find a chance to get close to Nian later, and it would be best if they could directly become friends with her. As for how to build a social network and get to know and climb up to powerful people, there was no need to go into detail here. Xianxia heard the conversation of these parents, but he did not care at all. A misunderstanding was a misunderstanding. Since someone wanted to make Nian happy for him, Great Supreme Qin could only raise his hands to express his welcome. As long as Nian was happy, he, as a father, did not mind playing the role of a powerful young master. In the lounge, Xianxia was not so rich that he had to buy Nian an exclusive horse, so the father and daughter could only wait for the club to arrange a horse. Nian was an official member. Therefore, according to the usual practice, as long as Xianxia communicated with the club in advance, then the club should prepare a horse before they arrived. Today, for some reason, the father and daughter sat in the lounge and waited for a full 20 minutes before the club staff hurriedly came to inform Nian that she could get on the horse. The horse today seemed to be of good pedigree. It was white all over and had a beautiful figure, without a trace of impurity. Nian liked it very much at first sight, so she did not care whether she had ridden this horse before or not. Under the guidance of the coach, she rode the horse quickly for a few laps. Nian seemed to be very talented in riding. After this period of training, she could even do obstacle training. "Father, look at me. Am I awesome?" After running a lap, the little girl sat on the back of the horse and laughed complacently. Her small body gave people a feeling of valiance and formidableness. For a moment, there was a bit of a left leading the yellow, right leading the blue, brocade hat and marten fur coat, thousands of riders rolling up the hill, chic and unrestrained heroism. "Awesome, awesome. Nian is the best." Xianxia laughed and cheered for her. The father and daughter seemed to be in a good mood. But at this moment, the staff just now ran to the coach in a panic, and then the two whispered something while looking up at Xianxia on the side. Chapter 539. In the open sky racecourse, the little girl was laughing proudly on the back of her horse. When the horse was running, the rider had to use the strength of his waist and legs to maintain his balance. Therefore, riding a horse was actually a very physically exhausting exercise. In addition, it was currently summer vacation, and the equestrian costume was very tight. Therefore, after one lap, the little girl's face was obviously covered in sweat. She was hot and tired, but she was still smiling from ear to ear. It was as if she had been injected with stimulants. The little girl was eager to try again. She seemed to want to do another lap. However, according to the club's regulations, the rider was not allowed to do obstacle training without the approval of the coach. Therefore, she could only ride the horse and look at the coach from the side. She almost directly interrupted the conversation between the staff member and the coach. During the conversation, the coach seemed to have heard some unpleasant news, so he frowned slightly. Seeing this, the staff member's face couldn't help but flash a trace of awkwardness. Then he continued to explain with a flourish. Looking at the situation, it seemed like there was a problem. "Okay, then it's settled. But you'd better explain to Mr. Qin first, in case he complains about you." After a short communication, the coach waved his hand impatiently and signaled the staff member to explain to Xianxia. Although Xianxia was standing outside the racecourse, he still heard every word of the conversation between the two. Therefore, when the staff member hurried over to him, Xianxia was already smiling and waving at Nian. "Nian, let the coach help you get off the horse. Come out for a second, Dad has something to tell you." Xianxia wanted Nian to get off the horse. Hearing this, the little girl, who was in high spirits, suddenly became a little unhappy. She shook her head, then pouted and shouted at Xianxia unhappily, "No, I want to run 2 more laps." As she said this, Nian even clamped her legs together as a demonstration. Speaking of which, this little girl was almost 10 years old. In addition to acting cute and coquettishly, she more or less had some rebellious mentality, so she would not listen to and obey Xianxia like she used to. In this regard, Xianxia was not angry. Instead, he turned his head with a smile and looked at the staff walking towards him. "Mr. Qin, I'm sorry, it's like this. Due to the negligence of our staff, the horse that your daughter is riding today is actually a customer's private horse. Now that the client has arrived at the club, the training is about to begin. So, do you think you can forgive our mistake and let us arrange a new horse for your daughter?" The attitude of the staff member was also very sincere. After hearing this, Xianxia just smiled slightly and did not directly express his opinion. In fact, what kind of mistake was this? Because there were too many customers today, the horse farm didn't have their own horses. Thus, they randomly pulled a private horse for official members like Nian to practice. After all, the club needed to make money, so in addition to taking in official members, receiving individual customers was the main source of income for the club. And once the number of users increased, the club's horse would inevitably be in short supply. The club did not want to offend official members, nor did they want to give up on individual customers. Therefore, the club turned its attention to VIP customers. One had to know that VIP customers were all big tycoons. Official members like Nian would at most buy a set of equestrian clothes, but VIP customers directly bought a horse and left it at the club. For example, the white horse that Nian rode today was a purebred horse imported from abroad. Its price was estimated to be comparable to a McLaren. However, no matter how expensive a horse was, it was still a horse. Horse naturally had to be taken out for a walk, just like a dog. VIP customers bought horses to show their status, so they would not often come to the club. Therefore, providing VIP customers' horse for official members to practice became an unspoken rule of the club. Nian encountered such a situation today. She was riding a horse, but the owner of the horse suddenly came to the club. Therefore, no matter how unwilling she was, the staff had to politely ask her to get off the horse. It wasn't as if this had never happened before. It was just that the customers had to change their clothes before riding, so the club had enough time to coordinate. Therefore, no mistakes were made. After all, the horse that Nian rode was their private property, so although Xianxia was a little unhappy, he did not mean to deliberately make things difficult for the staff. Therefore, after listening to the staff, Xianxia turned his gaze back to Nian and was about to ask Nian to return the horse to them. But no one would have thought. Just as Xianxia was about to speak, there was a sudden cry from the side of the path, "Mom! My horse! Someone is riding my horse!" The moment they heard this voice, not only did the staff's expression change, even Xianxia could not help but frown. "Who are you? This is my horse. Who agreed to let you ride my horse? Come down quickly." After hearing this shout, Nian could not help but feel a little confused. She rode high on the horse and turned her head to look at the direction of the voice, only to find a little girl about her age standing at the railing of the racecourse, glaring at her. The girl seemed to be very angry. If it were not for the railing, she would have rushed over and forcefully pulled Nian off the horse. The sudden change of events caused Nian's little brain to stop working. She sat on the horse in a daze, and before she could react, the coach beside her hurriedly came to her side and signaled for her to come down quickly. "I'm not coming down." Seeing that the coach seemed to want to forcefully carry her down, Nian was a little unhappy. She immediately pouted, turned her head and shouted at Xianxia, "Dad, I haven't played enough. Can you let me play for a while more?" Children did not understand the filth between adults. She had not played enough, so of course she would stay on the horse and refuse to come down. For a moment, the situation was a little awkward. Seeing that Nian still refused to come down, the little girl by the railing suddenly blushed, as if she had been provoked by something, and could not help but burst into tears. Mom, outside the racecourse. The little girl wailed loudly. Seeing her so pitiful and helpless, she could not bear to see her like this. Hence, he did not spoil Nian anymore, and directly went forward to carry Nian down from the horse. Chapter 540. Nian was a good student from the capital-affiliated primary school. Although when she stayed by Xi's side, it was inevitable that she would throw a little tantrum, but her worldview was still very correct. As a matter of fact, after seeing the girl suddenly cry, Nian immediately stopped talking and sat silently on the horse's back. Even when Xianxia wanted to carry her down, she didn't resist. "Dad, I didn't bully her." The little girl felt wronged. Otherwise, with her usual personality, she would have rushed up to comfort the girl. Speaking of which, Nian was now 9 years old and had already formed a more complete concept of consumption. Therefore, in her mind, she was a consumer who spent money to ride the horse here, so she didn't think she did anything wrong. Maybe the girl saw that she was having fun riding the horse, so she wanted to steal it from her? After all, children like to steal other people's toys. Similar things happened to Wenwen and Mingming too many times, so Nian was already used to it. Nian still didn't understand what was going on. She comforted her in a low voice, then held her hand and stood aside, silently waiting for the other party's parents to come. The child was crying very loudly. It was not an exaggeration to say that she was wailing. Therefore, not long after she started crying, a well-dressed lady ran over from the other side of the path. After hearing her daughter's crying, the lady ran over in her high heels. Perhaps it was because she paid a lot of attention to maintaining her appearance, so it was impossible to tell the woman's true age from her appearance. "Nanan, what's going on? Who bullied you? Come on, don't cry. Mommy will help you." With the comfort of the lady, the little girl finally stopped crying. Then she angrily pointed at Nian and said, "It's her. She rode my Snow White without my permission." Perhaps it was because she had watched too many cartoons, but this white horse held a very high position in the little girl's heart. Therefore, she could not accept anyone else riding her white horse other than herself. "Hey, what's wrong with you guys? Don't you know who this horse belongs to? Who are they? A professional coach? Or a paramedic? Who agreed to let them ride up? I pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to your club, and this is how you take care of my horses? Don't you know how expensive my horse is? Hurry up and ask your manager to give me an explanation." The cause of this incident was very simple. After listening for a while, the woman figured out the crux of the matter, so she pointed the muzzle directly at the staff on the side. The staff member felt bitter inside. Facing the woman's accusation, he opened his mouth a little cowardly, but in the end, he couldn't say a word. He could only stand there and take the scolding with his head down. In fact, this kind of mistake was not easy to make. This was because whenever the private horse of a big client arrived at the club, the staff would carefully observe it for a period of time. Only after confirming that these big clients rarely came to the racecourse would they list the horse as a spare tire. The horse had been in the club for more than half a year, but the owner had never ridden it. Today, they had pulled it out for Nian to ride for a while, but they didn't expect that something would happen. As the owner of the horse, the little girl's age was about the same as Nian's, so she could only come to the racecourse to practice during the holidays. She was a child, so naturally, she couldn't be like adults and pay attention to formalities. She wanted to see her horse as soon as possible, so after arriving at the club, she rushed directly to the racecourse, so that the staff didn't have time to mediate. "I'm sorry, Miss Zhuang. Today's incident was caused by the mistakes of our staff. Please calm down first, don't be too agitated." After hearing the commotion outside, the manager hurried to the racecourse. The woman seemed to recognize him, so she immediately turned the muzzle and scolded the manager. One had to know that this lady in front of him was a big client of the club. Who could afford to offend her? Therefore, no matter how bad the woman's scolding was, the coach and staff just stood aside and didn't dare to say a word. The manager kept nodding in agreement, hoping that the woman would calm down. In fact, today's incident had nothing to do with Nian, it was all the club's fault. After listening for a while, Xianxia couldn't be bothered with the people in front of him. He looked down at Nian and asked, Nian, do you still want to ride? If you want to ride, I'll get them to find you another horse, okay? Hearing this, Nian immediately nodded. Although her father didn't say it clearly, she roughly understood the situation and knew that she couldn't ride this white horse in front of her anymore. Therefore, the little girl reluctantly looked at the white horse next to her, then quickly walked out of the racecourse under Xianxia's lead. Where are you going? The woman was still angry at the club for using her horse without permission. Suddenly seeing that Xianxia and his daughter wanted to leave, the woman was instantly angry, so she directly stopped them. After hearing the woman's reprimand, Xianxia immediately stopped. He frowned and turned around to say something. The club manager directly blocked in front of him, then said to the woman with a smile, Miss Zhuang, these two are also members of our club. Today's incident was mainly due to our mistake in the work arrangement. I hope you don't take it to heart. Why don't we do this? In order to compensate you for your loss, I can represent the club to give you a free maintenance and management package, plus a set of equestrian clothes. The manager's attitude was still correct. He took the initiative to ask the woman for compensation, and at the same time, he took all the responsibility. He only hoped that the woman wouldn't vent her anger on others. However, even if the woman knew that today's incident was caused by the club, she couldn't accept Nian swaggering away like that. Didn't she see that her child was still crying? Therefore, if Nian didn't apologize, the woman would definitely not let her go easily. Do you know how much this horse costs? What if it breaks? You pay for it? No, she has to apologize to Nanan today before she can leave. For a moment, not only was the club manager stunned, even Xianxia suspected that he had misheard. Apologize? Was this woman crazy? Or was her worldview distorted? Chapter 541. Apologize? After hearing the woman's righteous request, Xianxia couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. Did I hear wrongly? Seeing Xianxia's completely unrepentant appearance, the woman suddenly couldn't help but get angry. So, she immediately turned her gun and aimed it at Xianxia. She seemed to have reason and evidence to back it up. What, is there a problem? Is it so hard to say sorry? Your child is about the same age as my Nanan. As a parent, haven't you taught her that she needs to have basic manners when interacting with others? This horse was originally bought for Nanan as a birthday gift. Normally, even I, as her mother, can't ride it, let alone strangers like you. Your daughter rode Nanan's horse without Nanan's permission. Do you think this kind of behavior is any different from stealing? After hearing this, Xianxia couldn't help but frown deeper. He opened his mouth and wanted to refute the woman's point of view, but the woman didn't give him a chance to speak. She continued, Of course, you can also push the blame to the club. Then I want to ask you in return, someone handed you a knife. After you kill someone, can you push the blame to the person who handed you the knife? May I ask which law stipulates this? After hearing the woman's words, Xianxia was suddenly angered by her and laughed. In this life, he could be considered to have lived for hundreds of years. He had come into contact with unreasonable people, but he had never seen someone who could be so unreasonable to this extent. Was this a crosstalk? If it weren't for the fact that the other party was a woman, Xianxia would have taken Nian and left. What are you laughing at? Do you think I said something wrong? Also, I'm not a petty person. I don't have the leisure to argue with a child. I just hope that as a parent, you can understand that educating a child is not a very easy thing to do. There's a good saying, if you make a mistake, you have to admit it. If you are beaten, you have to stand upright. The reason why I want her to apologize to Nanan is to help your child establish a correct sense of right and wrong. At the same time, I want to prevent Nanan's heart from continuing to be hurt. Tell me, is my request really too much? Needless to say, when a woman came up with a crooked argument, she could really turn black into white. If it was an introverted person who had encountered such a situation, Perhaps he would have hurriedly asked his child to apologize to the other party and take the blame for this matter without knowing what was going on. Anyway, it was just 3 words. "I'm sorry. What's the big deal?" The woman felt that her request was not excessive at all. But it was a pity. Xianxia and Yan were not the kind of muddle-headed good guys. We choose to be kind, but that doesn't mean that we will condone fallacies. Outside the stable. They secretly rode on her horse, but they didn't even apologize. Once she thought of Yan riding on the back of the horse, that valiant feeling instantly made the little girl feel uncomfortable from the bottom of her heart. It was like a fishbone in her throat. Don't think that children don't have schemes. At least at this moment, the little girl suddenly had a very firm thought in her heart, and that was, cry. She must cry until her mother made them apologize to her. Therefore, she immediately took on the posture of Meng Jiangnu, sat on the ground, and started bawling her eyes out. This time, the woman panicked. But no matter how she comforted her, the little girl didn't listen. Instead, she cried and kept repeating, "She rode on my horse, she rode on my horse." It was like Tang Sing chanted the golden hoop spell. Soon, the woman was completely overwhelmed by her daughter's crying. Seeing that Xianxia and his daughter's figures were about to disappear at the end of the road, the woman seemed to have finally made a decision. She couldn't help but say to the little girl with a fierce expression, "Darling, don't cry first. Stand up first, mother will make the decision for you. She must apologize to you today." Then, the woman directly turned to look in the direction she came from, and shouted in that direction, "Ah Biao, stop them for me, don't let them go." Jiutian Divine Emperor. The rise of the martial arts craze actually meant that the spirit of martial arts was declining. A martial artist like Qin Shueqing, who had a strong mind and conviction, probably couldn't be found now, right? Qin Shueqing had left Earth for 2 years. Therefore, many times, Shi couldn't help but think of that willful and stubborn sister-in-law. Fortunately, the defensive magic treasure he'd given Qin Wanqing hadn't been activated. This meant that Qin Wanqing hadn't encountered any life-threatening danger for now, and this caused Shi to feel much more at ease. Because of Ah Biao, she suddenly thought of Qin Shueqing. However, very soon, this thought was completely thrown to the back of his mind. "I'm sorry, I can't do it. Please don't make it difficult for me," she said to Ah Biao with a serious face. After that, he walked past Ah Biao with Yan. "Sir, please wait." Seeing that she was still going to leave, Ah Biao directly stretched out his arm to block his way. "Please make way." Without any superfluous movements, Shi directly bumped into Ah Biao's arm. Like a train slowly moving, Ah Biao tried to block Shi with force. However, it was fine if he didn't use force. But this force, a huge force that was enough to suffocate people, suddenly burst out from Shi's body. Bang! With a muffled sound, Ah Biao's whole body flew out instantly as if he was hit by a train. At that moment, Ah Biao was completely stunned. He only felt that his mind was blank. When he finally came back to his senses, he found that he was sitting under a big tree by the roadside, and the lounge where Shi and his daughter were was at least 10 meters away from him. Ah Biao touched his chest and his arm. There was not a trace of injury on his body, not even a trace of pain. It was like a dream. When he woke up, he was already lying under this tree. You, Ah Biao pointed at Shi as if he wanted to say something. However, when Shi looked back at him, Ah Biao suddenly felt like a bucket of cold water was suddenly poured on him, and his whole body slightly trembled. Well, I saw that some readers seem to have misunderstood. In fact, I'm not writing a face slap. I want to use this incident to indirectly tell you about the changes in Yan in the past 2 years, and the changes in the whole society. In the end, it seems that I failed again. Since the country wanted to take the lead in starting a revolution, problems would follow. Whose life were they going to overthrow? The answer was obvious. That was, the revolution is the fate of the whole world. It had to be said that Wu Lian was very ambitious. Even if the first 5-year plan had not been completed, the second 5-year plan was already in its infancy. The main goal of the second 5-year plan was to select the most talented martial artists and grant them the corresponding necromancer inheritance to ensure that these people would obey the Wu Lian in the future. In the past, a martial artist's actual combat ability would not be inferior to a necromancer of the same level. They might even be able to crush a necromancer of the same level. But one had to know that things were different now. The heaven and earth spirit chi began to recover, which meant that the cultivation speed of the necromancer lineage began to increase by leaps and bounds. Although martial artists also benefited a lot from this, they still could not compare to necromancers who could draw chi into their bodies. Therefore, under the deliberate guidance of the Wu Lian, a complete and systematic promotion path from ordinary people to martial artists to necromancers appeared out of thin air. Biao also wanted to become a necromancer. However, he neither had enough merit to exchange for cultivation methods from the Wu Lian nor enough money to buy incomplete cultivation methods from the dark web. Therefore, becoming a disciple of a certain necromancer by chance became the most feasible method. Here was something to mention. The Wu Lian did not restrict necromancers from accepting disciples. Therefore, while the martial arts club was developing rapidly in society, the necromancer inheritance was also expanding in secret. However, because the necromancer lineage paid more attention to talent, those who were lucky enough to become a disciple of a necromancer were simply too rare. Over the years, Biao had gone deep into famous mountains and great rivers in an attempt to become a disciple of a certain immortal. Unfortunately, no sect was willing to take him in. Xianxia had just shown a little of his skill, which not only sent him flying more than 10 meters away, but also did not hurt him at all. What was such a wonderful skill if not a necromancer's skill? Therefore, the moment Biao came to his senses, he jumped up from the ground like a carp. "Senior!" Biao shouted as he quickly caught up with Xianxia and his daughter. Xianxia did not pay attention to him. Seeing that Xianxia and his daughter were about to enter the lounge, Biao was so excited that he bent his knees and knelt heavily on the ground in front of everyone present. "I am Tu Biao. I have long heard of the necromancer's elegant demeanor. It is my honor to meet you today. Please, the great era was coming." Therefore, like every martial artist who was depressed, Biao had the idea of becoming a disciple of Xianxia the moment he confirmed his identity. However, what Biao did not expect was, before he could finish his words, Xianxia directly sealed his mouth with her true essence, so that he could only lie on the ground and muffled whimpers. Nian noticed something strange behind her and was about to look back when Xianxia suddenly reached out and put his arm around her shoulder. He lowered his head and asked with a smile, "Nian, did you feel wrong just now? Do you want Daddy to buy you a horse too? Then you can ride it whenever you want, and you don't have to worry about being kicked off the horse in the future." After hearing Xianxia's words, the little fellow's eyes suddenly lit up. Therefore, she immediately ignored the movement behind her and excitedly hugged Xianxia and said coquettishly, "Daddy is so nice. Then let's go. Daddy will take you to see the horse." Xianxia pretended to leave. But after taking 2 steps, Nian seemed to have suddenly thought of something. She could not help but pull Xianxia and ask hesitantly, "Daddy, is the horse very expensive?" "Why do you ask this?" "Because beef is very expensive." Looking at Nian's serious face, Xianxia suddenly did not know whether to laugh or cry. Seeing this, the little fellow was a little confused, so she continued to say, "Daddy, if the horse is too expensive, let's not buy it. The coach said that the horse can only be ridden here, but it is so far away from home. We have to take a long ride every time we come here. Moreover, I definitely won't have time to come again after school starts. Buying a horse but can't ride it a few times, it feels so wasteful." After hearing Nian's words, Xianxia was suddenly shocked. Did this child know to save money for him? When did she become so sensible? Xianxia did not care about money at all. so he always had an attitude of giving Nian Nian whatever she wanted. He did not expect that under these circumstances, Nian Nian did not develop the habit of spending money. Instead, she learned how to look at the value of things correctly. After all, the things in this world, there was no such thing as expensive or not, only value or not. The father and daughter discussed the value of the horse as they walked quickly into the lounge. At this time, Biao looked like he was finally untied. He could not help but have a complicated expression on his face. Then he slowly stood up from the ground. He stood motionless outside the lounge, completely ignoring the strange looks around him. After a full 5 minutes, the woman could not take it anymore and walked quickly in her high heels to Biao's side. Biao, what are you doing? I told you to stop them. Look at what you've done. You've completely disgraced me. Chapter 546. After witnessing a battle between supreme martial artists with her own eyes, Qin Wanqing immediately became much more cautious. She did not lie to her. The danger of the supreme palace enclosure was far beyond her imagination. But even so, Qin Xueqing did not have the slightest intention of retreating. Instead, she felt an inexplicable sense of excitement. At that moment, she was like a university student who had just entered society. She was anxious and excited, determined to realize her life's dream in this unknown land. Martial arts and cultivation. These were the ultimate goals that Qin Xueqing pursued in her life. If other people encountered such a terrifying scene, they would probably be so scared that their limbs would go numb and they would be at a loss of what to do. But Qin Xueqing was different. This battle between supreme martial artists, which was rarely seen in 100 years, did not scare her. Instead, it made her yearn for the strength displayed by the three of them. She yearned for the ultimate realm that could overlook all living things. If it were not for Qin Shi, she might never know what kind of existence above the divinity stage was. And it was also because of Qin Shi's appearance that a door to a new world opened for her. The so-called divinity stage. In the eyes of supreme martial artists, what was the difference between them and ants? Qin Xueqing was not willing to be an ant for the rest of her life. So she ignored Qin Shi's persuasion and came to the Supreme Palace enclosure alone. In fact, to Qin Xueqing, the Supreme Palace enclosure was actually a good place where danger and opportunity coexisted. Just like Heavenly Spiral, where Qin Shi used to be. Although Qin Shi had experienced many difficulties and dangers in Heavenly Spiral and was almost at the gates of hell. But it was undeniable that Qin Shi had also obtained an opportunity that ordinary people could not imagine. What Qin Xueqing wanted now was this kind of opportunity. The air was filled with violent true essence. Qin Xueqing quietly drove Xianxia to the center of the battlefield, trying to gain some insights from the battle traces left behind by the three. Unfortunately, her cultivation was too low, so she couldn't get any useful combat experience from it. Therefore, Qin Xueqing stayed here for about 2 hours before reluctantly leaving on Xianxia. The urgent matter at hand was to find out the exact situation of the Supreme Palace enclosure so that he could plan his next move. Thus, Qin Xueqing continuously circled in the air and spent an entire month observing the movements on the ground. It was during this time that Qin Xueqing discovered a very strange phenomenon. The boundary of the Supreme Palace enclosure was filled with a strange grayish-white fog. Once she steered Xianxia into it, the gray fog would instantly cover her vision. Even her spiritual sense would not be able to sense the things around her.